and welcome to an unexpected journal launch party for our King Arthur Legendarium prose, poetry, and scholarship issue. I'm your host, Carice Gillen, and this is your other host for our launch party. Annie, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, I'm Annie Nardoni. Carice and I have worked on the Unexpected Journal since the very beginning.
Yes.
And it has been quite a wild ride. It is every journal that comes out. We are in love with the topics. We talk about the topics that we're going to have coming up months in advance.
Yes.
But my medieval heart loves King Arthur.
Yes.
I love King Arthur. I love the nobility, the honor, the bravery, the virtue, all of it. And so when it came time to suggest issues for 2023, I said, can we do a King Arthur issue? And even though initially we thought, well, so much has already been said about King Arthur, the more we dug in, the more, as you would see, reading through all of the essays that have been submitted, the poetry that's been submitted, by reading through all of that, you see how the Arthur Legendarium has spread so many different directions to influence T.S. Eliot, Fairy Queen, currently movies, plays. The influence of King Arthur and the Legend of King Arthur, the Round Table, all of it, is truly astounding. When you look back in movies, there's so many movies that even if they aren't an exact reflection of medieval knights and jousting and all of that, the themes show up, and even in kids' cartoons.
Yes.
So, I was just really excited to dig in deeper, and I'm really thrilled at the scholarship and the fiction and the poetry that we have in this latest edition.
Yeah, because you played a special role in this issue. So you were I believe the title's managing editor.
Managing editor.
Yeah, which means you just basically make it happen, like all the things that have to do. So let's talk for just a minute in case there's somebody watching who has no idea what an unexpected journal is. Let's talk about what an unexpected journal is. We always say it's the journal for cultural and imaginative apologetics, but what even is that? Can you give us like a little recap of what cultural and imaginative apologetics is in case somebody doesn't have any idea what that is?
Well, each journal that we have chosen for the subject, we take a look at maybe past a lot of current culture, and we make the connections between the deeper theism that flows through even common culture, how we can look for it, how we can apply the Christian worldview in a winsome way through literature, poetry, scholarship, theater, film, all of those, music, how we can bring that beauty out and re-engage with the culture.
Perfect. Yeah, and if you look at our website, An Unexpected Journal, and you look at the different issues, there are things for Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Chesterton. There are things for superheroes and music and just really any way that a person might engage with culture or something you might enjoy, a favorite author. So I would just encourage you to check it out. Check out An Unexpected Journal, our website, and see if you find something that resonates with you in cultural and imaginative apologetics. When we started this little endeavor, we had no idea how it would turn out.
We started as a bet on Facebook, I think, a challenge to each other. You know, we have all of these things that we'd like to talk about. Why don't we create a quarterly academic journal?
Yes, absolutely. So like Zach and I were talking, we're like, there's nowhere to send this stuff. Like, well, we'll make one. We'll make one up. And it's turned out to be amazing. And the Lord has really blessed it. And he has worked in it. And it's so exciting to see that we are all the way almost to a birthday. I think we're almost to 5 years. I think that's right. A little birthday for our journal. So that's super exciting.
Yep.
Our, it's hard to mention the journal without mentioning what's now called Houston Christian University, Houston Baptist, which is our imaginative and cultural apologetics program. And we are going to actually start now. We're going to get started on segment 1, The Legend of Arthur. So we will see you right back for segment 1, The Legend of Arthur. Welcome to segment 1 of An Unexpected Journal's King Arthur launch party. So exciting. And this is called The Legend of Arthur. So we're going to talk about The Legend of Arthur with 2 of our authors, Annie Nardoni and Justin Wiggins. So I'm your host, Carice Gillen, and we're going to let them introduce themselves, tell us a little about themselves, and then tell us about the piece that they have featured in our issue. So Annie, if you'll start and tell us a little about yourself and then tell us about the piece you have in our issue.
Sure. Carice mentioned that we started this journal through Houston Baptist, which is now Houston Christian University. And I've been working on it since day 1, submitting, editing, all of it, putting it all together. And I got my master's degree in cultural apologetics back in 2019. And so that's a little bit about me. And I'm an author on a few websites. I have a webpage, but anyhow, I want to just focus on Unexpected Journal today.
Perfect. Will you tell us a little about the piece that you have featured in this issue?
Sure. So as managing editor, I really wanted to highlight the work of all of the great authors that contributed, like Justin. So I wanted to put together a piece that would introduce people to the Arthur Legendarium. Many people have heard of King Arthur. Many people have read some of it, but not everybody. So I thought we have to start at the foundation and explain who Arthur was, where these stories originated, and they originated way back in the early Middle Ages. So I wrote an introductory piece on the history of Arthur and the contributing authors who finally wrote it down so that it could be shared in history. I also included an extensive beginning of the story of Arthur in an older language, because part of the joy of enjoying the Arthur legends is reading it in that beautiful lyrical language with big, beautiful words that we really need to be bringing back into conversation. We need to speak like that more. Of course, we don't want to speak medieval, but what I'm here to say is that when I assigned Sir Gawain and the Green Knight to my high school students, and I had them read some of the older texts from King Arthur, they were struck by how beautiful the language was. And we don't have that as much anymore. And when I would read them old prayers, they loved the language. They loved the phrasing and how you read it slow and how the meaning was rich and deep. And you were forced to slow down and read. You couldn't just blast through because you had a bunch of boring adjectives. You had this beautiful flowery language that told this story, this noble story. And the idea for my introductory piece was based on help in in thoughts from my students. They said, why don't we talk like this more often? Why don't we write like this more often? This is so beautiful and so much more meaningful than the drivel that we are so often assigned in school.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you're right. And their vocabulary increased the longer we went through the semester, just because they were reading this rich prose of a beautiful story that sounded more noble and more virtuous and more lovely. And honestly, if you're reading the Bible's full of rich, sometimes complicated, especially if you read the King James Version, complicated prose. It's there. If you don't adapt, the King James or the other translations of the Bibles are a little bit flatter for it when you read it. So I wanted to introduce old language to kind of shore up reading the Bible. And reading the writings of the church fathers. It's easier to understand once you've acclimated to that kind of speaking, writing. So you'll find the first article after the poem that I included from Chesterton. You'll find this extensive chunk of the story that's just straight out, read this. It's off of Gutenberg, but it's the best way to adapt to this beautiful language.
I love that. I love that we included that, and I love that you put a foundation for the modern reader. And speaking of lyrical language, Justin, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little about your piece in this issue?
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be part of this live broadcast. So my name is Justin Wiggins. I'm from Eastern North Carolina. I'm a convert from agnosticism to Christianity, which happened about 15 years ago. It was through the influence of the musician John Foreman, the writings of C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, J.R. Tolkien, Madeline L'Engle. And I went to Pitt Community College, East Carolina University, and I finished my bachelor's in English literature at Montreat College and studied under Dr. Don King, who's a hero of mine, a very humble, incredible individual. And I currently live here in Black Mountain, North Carolina. Write for 2 small publishers in the UK, work for Barnes & Noble, and do some freelance writing. And my Avalon poem was inspired by C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength and Perelandra.
Nice. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. And that's so great. And we're definitely going to have a time at the end to talk about places we can find you. So kind of keep that in the back of your head so you can tell us more about your writing. One of the first things that we want to talk about in our segment is there's this enduring quality. Annie talked some about it. You talked about it really when you said, when I came out of agnosticism into Christianity, I came like walking through these authors, right? A lot of whom have all these Arthurian flavors in them. So what is it about this legend that has this enduring quality? What do you think the themes are that resonate with people throughout history and then the modern reader? Like what themes would resonate with the modern reader? Like why is it still hanging around? Why do we still love the legend of King Arthur? So who would like to go first?
Go ahead, Justin.
Go, Justin.
So I believe the King Arthur legend it's transcendent in the context of that King Arthur is a Christ-like archetype that exudes compassion, wisdom, humility, and justice. And anyone of whatever worldview is attracted to those things, because as Christians, we believe that we are created in the image of the Maker, and we have desires within ourselves for justice, and we find those virtues that King Arthur embodies very attractive. So I think it's amazing that modern day examples from literature involving King Arthur, for example, Stephen Lawhead's Pendragon Arthurian Legend series is when you read through it, you can see that he's inspired by Tolkien, Lewis, and MacDonald, and Lawhead does fantasy very well. And it's amazing to me that although you do, although the reader can see the theology in it, it's for people of all worldviews. And I think Lawhead's Arthurian Legend series is an incredible modern day example of why the legend of King Arthur still endures.
Yeah, great. Yeah, those themes of justice and nobility. I think Annie touched on some of that in the beginning when she was talking about why her students were so mesmerized by the story too. Annie, did you want to have anything to add to that?
Well, thank you, Justin, for adding to my book list and suggesting because as you can see, I need more books. I think, like Justin said, we are created as a reflection of God. And in that being created, we lean into justice, virtue, goodness, truth, beauty. And timeless stories like this draw us in because we see that in the story. We know we can go back there and see that truth will win out, justice will win out, honor will win. And we crave that. We crave those kinds of stories where we see goodness and evil at battle, but goodness wins. Nobility wins. There are heroes, and we love a good hero story.
Yes.
And I think that there are so many ways, all the movies that I have seen with Arthur as a character, I get that dose of heroism that my mind craves. I want to see someone stand up for something bigger than they are and fight for what's right. And I think that's why we keep turning back to these stories. It's just like any of the other stories that have not washed away. Like, why do we keep reading Lord of the Rings? Why do we keep reading Lewis? Why do we keep reading the Narnia tales? Because they have embodied what our reflection of God's souls want to see and want to know and want to read. I think that is why the Arthur stories are so appealing. And going all the way back to Beowulf, I look at Beowulf and there's still goodness, honor, mercy, justice, truth reflected in that story. And we're still reading that one 1,500 years after that was developed, written later. But those are the kind of stories that we are instinctively drawn to.
Yeah, absolutely. We want that hero. We long for that hero and that justice. And I definitely want to give Justin a chance to read his poem to our audience. So I think we're going to do that now. I believe, Carla, it has some slides that are going to pop up that will have. Yes, there you go. All right, Justin, take it away.
Thank you. Avalon. Avalon, the sacred isle, separate from the mortal realm, can be glimpsed by the entrancing spell of music, books, and visual art that tells the alchemy of the great bard's Celtic song. Its power brings harmony out of chaos and makes weak mortal hearts beat strong. Avalon, where the once and future King Arthur sleeps, until Merlin raises his staff and utters the spell to wake Albion's king. For the last battle and the defeat of evil and the powers of darkness, there will be no more weeping nor tears, only great rejoicing, love, song, art, and landscapes beyond comprehension, and the great bard will humbly wash our weary feet.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love all the particular allusions that you have in your poem to the various Arthurian tales. I think it's fantastic. One of the things in your poem that's really interesting is this idea of like a final defeat of chaos, this like we kind of have talked around this a little bit with the hero idea, but want to talk about like hope and order, right? So do you think that the desire for this ordering, how is that connected to hope? Because there is this idea that Arthur is coming back, right? This like return of the king. You see it in Tolkien, you see it, but you see it in these legends. So my question would be like, how are hope and order connected themselves, but then also particularly in the story?
So hope and order are connected in the context of the agape love of Christ gives me hope as a fallen human being in a very broken world. And what I love about the Arthurian legend or the Celtic myth of Tir which is similar to the Arthurian legend of Avalon and Tolkien's mythology, Lewis's mythology, the fairy tales of George MacDonald, the fantasy of Madeline L'Engle and Stephen Lawhead, and Celtic music and landscapes that I've seen in Ireland, the land of James Painting and John O'Donoghue, and Lewis was a Belfast Ulster man. So those landscapes and those great works of literature and the ancient myths and modern films in Marvel and DC and um, visual art and the gift of love and acts of justice and mercy, all of that for me gives a glimpse of the marriage of heaven and earth, and that gives me hope in the here and now. And I remember before my conversion, I was afraid that faith was a delusion, and then I came to understand after reading Lewis and MacDonald that faith is based off of reason, and that you use your we all have the existential intellectual questions, but it ultimately comes down to coming to know a person, the risen Christ that rose from the dead in first century Palestine. And that changed everything for me. And then I understood that faith was not a delusion, but faith is a virtue. And that was so freeing and so revolutionary for me. And what I loved about Lewis and MacDonald, especially, is they helped me recover from a lot of the religious fundamentalism that I experienced growing up, and gave me the permission to not check my brain at the door, and allowed me to and so they showed me this wonderful harmony between faith, reason, your own imagination, and personality all coming together by grace. And what I love again about these great works of art and literature, myth, and acts of compassion and justice and mercy is or even something simple as sacramental as enjoying a pint of Guinness and fish and chips and a pub in Dublin, the memories, it all gives you a glimpse of the marriage of heaven and earth in the here and now. And I love that I did it deliberately, that describing as Christ as the great bard, because to me he is the great bard, the great composer, if you will, and the alchemy of his agape love is making all things new. And that gives me hope in here now, because if we're quite honest, we see our world and the us versus them mentalities have gotten worse, and we're so individualistic. And I'm so thankful that for genuine connections like this and Lewis and Tolkien and Inklings community, and connections I've made outside of that community with different authors and writers, it gives me hope, and it reminds me where my hope is found in the agape love of Christ. And again, I love how that is conveyed in the Arthurian legend and Celtic myth of Tir and modern day examples of how myth explores what it means to be human and the longing for redemption in the here and now. That is incredibly encouraging to me and reminds me of where our hope is found in Christ.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up community, because that community is a big deal in Arthur, right? It's never just about him. There's never this one random Lone Ranger situation, really, ever. And he has to have his community, and it has to operate in a certain order, and there has to be something coming out of that. And I think it's really interesting, especially for us as Americans, is we don't operate in a monarchy, but we understand that, we get that order, and it makes the community make sense for them. And so then you're talking about, the ordering of our affections within our community of artists, and that's that same thing because God is our king. So Annie, did you have some things to add about hope and order and chaos coming out of the Arthurian legends and ideals?
I'd like to tie into the what you said about community, the sense of community, which is very strong. You're right. You see it in King Arthur. You have the knights who are devoted to each other, the chivalry, honor, respect, but community. When I read Sir Gawain, there's always a feast going on. There's a feast. There is a challenging thing that you have to work through, like what he had to go see the Green Knight and potentially get his head chopped off. But then he comes back and there's another feast and there's welcoming him in and a little jesting, kind of poking fun at poor Gawain, but there's still welcome home, welcome back. Tell us your story. And that is another thing that is so critical to think about the whole legendarium. We are creatures of story. Story is what we have at our core. We relate to each other through story. We tell other people about us by telling our story. And we can convey so much meaning through a good story. And that's what the Arthur Legendarium does. It conveys so much meaning and praises and holds in high esteem things like your relationships, your respect, your honor, your duty. And when you read the stories deeper and deeper and look at the symbolism, it's just embedded in everything. The shields that they have, the symbols that are on their armor, the pieces of clothing that they put on. And I think that's another thing that's so much fun to read, is because it's like a Where's Waldo puzzle. You're looking at all these things and you're thinking, the author of this story did not just say green for no apparent reason at all. Yeah. He did not have Arthur or whomever walking through a situation with special symbolism for no reason at all. Everything was thought out. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes the read is so rewarding, because you can pick through that and you go off on rabbit trails. Why did they say that? Why did they ride that? Why did they have this horse versus that horse versus this shield versus this armor? It's just so fun to read, but yet you learn a lot about relationships and all of the good virtues. You learn about sin, but you learn about virtue and the quality of a human being, what we would respect, what endures, what quality endures. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I find in these, one of the biggest things I find in these stories. They're just so gratifying to read. And I think, oh, that was a good thing. That was a good quality to have. I will be that person that will try to bring that good quality back again. Hospitality, just the idea of hospitality, bringing people in and feeding them and providing for them. And we'll get to that in another essay that was posted. That's amazing as well. So all of those qualities, I think, come together to make Arthur an enduring story, legend, and why we just keep going back to it.
Absolutely, yeah. Why we want to be a part of that story community and get into that story and be in that story. And speaking of stories, we are almost to the end. So it's time for y'all to talk about, hopefully, the where we can find you what you're writing next. If you have books you have written, you can hold them up so we can see them. That would be great. And talk to us a little bit about your next project. So Justin, if you want to tell us, where can we find you? If you have websites, where are you published? What are you working on next? That would be awesome.
Thank you. So yes, I have a website on via Clarendon House Publications and Inspired. So if you just Google Justin Wiggins, Surprised by Agape, or Tirdanog, you'll find my Amazon page and my Inspired page and Clarendon House Publications page. I owe a great debt to these two small publishers in the UK. They do great work by publishing writers and poets all over the world, and through them I've connected with some incredible people that I haven't met all of them in person, but most, and they are so encouraging, and they're all about community and human connection, none of that egocentric nonsense. So, which is incredibly encouraging.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And the current project I am working on is a fantasy novella called Celtic Dawn, and it is set in the 21st century and the Celtic otherworld. I'm working on the final edits right now. I'm very excited about it. It should be out in a few weeks, and it is inspired by the Irish myth of Tir na Nog, Tolkien, Lewis, MacDonald, Seamus Heaney, John O'Donoghue, Madeline Lingle, and I have put my heart and soul into it. I'm very excited about it. And after that, I will be working on a book, hopefully that will come out next year. That is a love letter to bookshops. And recently I had a poem published called Reading George MacDonald in Scotland. And I had the honor of being published with Annie Nardoni in Poetica number 12 by Grant Hudson.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to receiving my copy. And so that's just a bit about me and where you can find some of my work.
Fantastic. And if you're watching this and you can look at the bottom on the little ticker tape at the bottom, you can see the Clarendon House spelled out website. So fantastic. We are looking forward to that book. So let us know when it launches. All right, Annie, where can we find you? What are you working on? What have you been doing?
Okay. Well,
Everything.
let's see. Well, since we are in the Arthurian legend category, I have a story in the Lost Tales of Sir Galahad, a fictional piece that the book talks about the adventures of Galahad that are not written about. So we all got together and thought, ooh, what could we come up with? Where did Galahad go? So I came up with a adventure story about Galahad. That's through Rabbit Room Press. Justin, here's our Poetica. So Justin and I are both published in Poetica by Grant at Clarendon House Publications. And I wrote for Square Halo Publishers, book recommendations for little kids and the people who raise them, the best books for children, and I suggested books that would teach art history, because that's my place. Wrote a essay, apologetics essay dedicated to Tim Keller for Tim Keller, and it was based on C.S. Lewis. And I was published in Kala Press, one of my recent poems, and so I write for Kala Press and Clarendon Publishing and Unexpected Journal and the Cultivating Project online. I write for them as well.
All right, fantastic. Well, y'all, our time is up. This has been amazing. Segment 1, The Legend of Arthur. Thank you very much for being here today. It's been great.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Hey, Annie.
Hey, Junius. Good to see you.
You as well.
I can't wait to have a chance just to talk to you for a half an hour and have the whole wide world see it, because you are one of the most well-read and amazingly educated human beings I've ever met. You can riff off in different languages, and I think it was a great honor to have you contribute one of your stories to the magazine, to the journal this quarter. So first off, I want you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, some of the projects you're working on, some of the things that you do, and so go for it.
Yeah, well, I'm a theologian and a teacher, a philosopher and a literary scholar, and so I have a variety of things that I work on, all kind of centered through my two websites, juniusjohnson.com and academics.juniusjohnson.com. So I offer courses that are synchronous Zoom courses for both adults and children in various topics in literature, theology, and Latin. I'm focusing a lot on teaching literature that has fantastical elements in it these days, because I like those kinds of books myself. I always have, and they've been an important part of my own intellectual development. They were obviously important to the types of folks who people watching this stream are going to be familiar with, Tolkien and Lewis and MacDonald and all of that lot. And I think they still have a lot to teach us, and we have not given them the kind of serious attention that we do some other books. And so what does it look like to read a book like The Hobbit with the level of attention to detail that we do with the Odyssey, for example? And that's one of the things that I'm very interested in. I've got a book coming out with Classical Academic Press next month called On Teaching Fairy Stories. And what I have done there, the title is referring to Tolkien's great essay on fairy stories, which you can find in the Tree and Leaf connection. And I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to make an extended argument and demonstration for what the value of teaching these stories as a part of the curriculum is, especially in classical curricula where you're doing a lot of primary source reading and that sort of a thing. What's the space for these fantastical stories? What do we gain by bringing them in? What do we lose or risk losing when we don't bring them in? But I'm also very excited that the last section of that book is an essay that I've written called What Does Fairyland Require?, which is my response to Tolkien's On Fairy Stories, Lewis, Sometimes Fairy Stories Say Best What's to Be Said, as well as on Three Ways of Writing for Children, George MacDonald's story on the imagination, its culture and uses. So there's this tradition of Christian writers reflecting on fantastical literature, and I wanted to contribute my own thoughts to that. So I'm very excited for people to get a chance to see that next month. In addition, I'm also doing a lot of work on Lewis right now. I'm doing a lot of work on the Space Trilogy. I'm working on an article on The Dark Tower, which is the aborted sequel to Out of the Silent Planet. And I'm writing a book about The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is a series of theological readings of the episodes in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So to give you a preview of that, the way they transition into Narnia in that book through the painting, I'm going to discuss that as an image of what it looks like for those Christians who worship with icons, how that's a beautiful image of what they think is going on in such moments. And I'm also writing a book that's a bit further down the road, just on the last chapter of Paralandra on the Great Dance, unpacking all of the theological and philosophical mysteries that Lewis refers to in the Great Dance. So those are some of the things I'm working on now.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to read what you write about The Dark Tower, because it's sitting on my shelf. I have this beautiful old copy sitting on my shelf, and I just haven't taken the time to, because I know I'm going to have to muscle my way through it. But I look forward to seeing what you have to write. You got a lot going on.
Try to keep busy.
Yeah. So you contributed to the journal with a story. You wrote a short story called Galahad and the End of the Quest. Can you share a little bit about what inspired you to write this great piece?
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the end of the last segment, you joined me in contributing to the Rabbit Room volume of the Lost Tales of Sir Galahad. I was added to that project as one untimely born. I think it was pretty close to completion, and Ned Boosted reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you write a Galahad story? I'm a couple short." And I was like, "Hey, Ned, you have to understand, I am a medieval scholar, and I've done a lot of reading, researching, and teaching on the Arthurian material. So if I write you a Galahad story, it's going to be really medieval." And he was like, "Bring it on. I don't mind." So I thought, okay. So I looked at the Howard Pyle, which was the inspiration for the thing, and looked at the style of it, and I thought, well, this style's pretty elevated and pretty medieval as well. It's not, normal way of talking these days. He's imitating the old language. So I let myself go, and I wrote a story that I really liked. And I sent it in, and the first response I got from all the folks at the Rabbit Room was, "This is the most medieval thing we've ever read, and this is really fantastic, and we love it," and all this other kind of thing. And I'm like, "Great, excellent, appreciate it." And then a bit later, I got an email back from them that said, "So as we're putting the volume together, yours is a little bit of an outlier. It doesn't really fit with the tone of the other stories. So we love it to death, but we just can't use it. Can you write us something else?" And I said, "Well, how long do I have?" And about a week. Okay. So I went for a long walk and thought about, okay, what would I write for them now? And by the time I got halfway through that walk, I realized what I wanted to write, and I came home and wrote it. And that's the story that wound up in that volume, which is Sir Galahad and the Menagerie of Light, centering on Galahad's encounter with different extraplanar beings. But then I was stuck with this one, which I really love, and which I didn't know where to publish. There's not a huge market out there for short stories about Sir Galahad that are written in a very medieval style. It's not what the places that publish short stories are really aching for these days. And so that's kind of how it came about. But when I saw that there was going to be an issue of the Unexpected Journal that was focused on Arthur, I wrote to you and I said, "Hey, would you guys be interested in a not so short story? And is that something you could work with?" And I was really delighted that you did have space for it.
Oh yeah, well, it fit hand in glove with what we're all about. So your writing style just fit so well with what we wanted to include. It was more academic. It was deeper and more challenging. And so I'm very thankful that things worked out the way they did, so that we got to feature your piece in our journal.
Yeah.
So now you got both, and that wasn't a lot of writing to do. that was some serious academic dive in. I thought with the piece that I wrote, I was having fun with it, and I was doing fun little riddles and medieval things, but you far and away have taken medieval and included all the beauty, all of the real tone, the real feeling. You took me right there. So I'm so glad that we had the honor of publishing your story.
I was rereading it earlier today, and I was just smiling the whole time because I was remembering just how much fun it was to put all of these little Easter eggs in there and to imitate all these various little things from different bits. And what's, in terms of what I would say about this story for someone coming at it fresh, is it's doing two things. It's trying to be a delightful story of Galahad in the tradition of the original text, but it's also trying to say something that really struck me as a reader of the particularly the Grail cycle. There was this thing that just drove me crazy. I was like, why does Arthur want the Grail to be found? It doesn't make any sense, because his whole life is set up around all these crazy miraculous things that are happening in England. And it says very clearly at one point in the 12th century anonymous quest of the Holy Grail that those things are happening because the Holy Grail is there. So why should Arthur want the Holy Grail to be found and taken away and lose all of these adventures that he thrives on? And that's bothered me for a long time. And when I teach the text, I always bring that to students' attention. And so this story was a way of exploring both, revealing that tension, but also exploring why at least the Grail writers would think that it made sense for the Grail to be found and removed from England and for all these things to stop. So that was a fun way to go about trying to make that larger point about the actual existing tradition that we have.
Okay. So what are some of the literary influences on this story? What did you lean into the most?
I was thinking mostly about the King Arthurian stories are a mishmash of a bunch of different cultures. You've got the Welsh culture, you've got a sort of English culture, you've got a Roman culture, you've got a French culture, and all these things are layered on top of each other. And even just right at the heart of the thing, you can see that Gawain, who was the greatest knight of Camelot, is a local boy. He's possibly a version of the old folk hero Cuchulainn. And so Arthur, as the Roman descended but British born man who's able to unite all of the kingdoms and become High King and be the first unified England, having Gawain as his kinsman and as his lead knight, it really tells a wonderful story of unified kingdom. And then the French come in 1066, and with the French come Lancelot and Guinevere. And Lancelot replaces Gawain as the greatest knight in the court, and you see this battle for eminence between the high nobility, who are now all French, and the lower nobility, who are the previously existing Anglo-Saxon lords, played out in the rivalry between Gawain and Lancelot, where Gawain can't really get the upper hand because the French guys are the ones in power, and they're getting to shape how the story is being told. So I was focusing more on the French side of that tradition, and the text that I had mostly in mind was actually this Quest of the Holy Grail, which this is a Penguin edition of it. There's several versions of it out there. We don't know who it was written by, but it was probably written in the 12th century, and it's kind of an extended sermon. The point of this text is to say everything that we in our world today think about when we think about Knights of the Round Table and Camelot and all these things is exactly the wrong things for Camelot to be about. Not that they weren't true of Camelot according to this text, but that was what it meant for Camelot to be in decline, for it to be a decadent place. Because what happens is that the knights are always out there. As soon as they see another knight, what do? They lower their beavers and they charge at each other, and they wind up accidentally killing their friends because they can't tell who anybody is, and they didn't talk first. They just charged and attacked, because that's what you do when you see another knight. It's all very Highlander. And then there's chivalry, and chivalry turns out to be this code of courtly love, whereby the knights are having these illicit and adulterous relationships with all of these women. I mean, look at Lancelot, right? There's a string of dead ladies floating down the Thames thanks to Lancelot's exploits. And that's what knighthood turns into. It's about killing other knights and beheading ladies. And so this text is saying that the group that is committed to that is not the right group to try to find the Holy Grail, which is the greatest spiritual quest you could imagine. And so the knights are going out and they're having one of two experiences. Either they're having these really bad encounters with miraculous events because they see these things happen and they don't know what they mean, because it takes spiritual vision to understand what they mean, and they get it wrong. And so they pick the wrong side and they wind up getting wounded or killed. Or they have Gawain's experience, which is that he wanders around the countryside for months and nothing happens, and he comes across no adventures because he's not worthy of them, and he's complaining about that. You see a lot of Lancelot having to repent and recognize, what he's done with Guinevere to be a sin, and he can't. There's no question of him finding the Grail, and when he does actually see the Grail, the first time it passes by him, he's asleep and he doesn't even wake up. And everyone talks about how spiritually dead he is, that he slept through when the Grail came by. The second time, he's not able to move. He's just stuck there, frozen in place, staring at the Grail. He's not the guy who can get it. But he nevertheless is set on a path of repentance that would save his soul, as long as he can avoid going back to Guinevere, which we know that he won't. And so there's a really touching point when Lancelot, who's Galahad's father, and Galahad are together, and then Lancelot is at the height of his repentance, and they're about to part ways for the final time. Galahad to go and get the Grail and then leave England forever, and Lancelot to go back into England. And Lancelot says to Galahad, "Pray for me, pray for my soul, and pray for the salvation of my soul. I don't want to lose what I have now. Please pray that I can maintain this so that we can see each other again in heaven." And Galahad fixes him with a stare and says, "Sir, for that, no man's prayer is more effective than your own." And they part ways, and we, the readers, know that that's it, that Lancelot is going to go back to Guinevere. He's going to hold out for a while, and then Guinevere is going to come after him and send ladies in waiting and ultimately show up herself and force him to come back to the court, and they're going to fall back into their old relationship, and then that's the end for Lancelot. So it's very painful, because we see this father and son parted, never to meet again. So that was the tradition I was writing out of more than any other text. Also in there, of course, is some of the usual stuff. Thomas Mallory's Mort d'Arthur, and Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a text that I greatly enjoy. and that is very important to this story, because the aspect of Gawain that a lot of readers don't realize is that Gawain is committed to two contradictory, mutually incompatible codes: the code of courtly love, and then the code of Christianity. And so he tries to be perfect in both of those things, but he can't, because courtly love requires him to return the lady's advances, and the Virgin Mary on his shield requires him to do otherwise. And it's ultimately this failure of it. It's another more subtle critique of the knighthood, as it comes down to us, that it's really not supposed to be about any of that. And so the story that comes out of all of this is true knighthood is not about killing Christians and bedding maidens. True knighthood turns out to be actually Christian discipleship. And that's why Galahad is the perfect knight. He's unbeatable in combat, and he's so good at everything he does because he's holy and because he put that holiness first. So I wanted to write out of all of that side of the tradition without, I didn't want to necessarily go in and say, okay, everything you guys think about Arthur is stupid and you should all forget about it and not do it anymore, because I love it all too. But at the same time, from this distance, we often don't have this other voice reminding us that what we're seeing and celebrating about the Arthurian court is actually its decadence, is actually the ways in which it was problematic and was expressive of a cancer in medieval culture.
Well, I'm really glad that you approached your story in that way, because so few of us have seen that side of it. We don't know. We don't know to the depth that you know the backstory to all of this. It's very easy to get swept up in the romance, the chivalry, the bravery, and all of that. But it's helpful to bring in the backstories and the stuff that you miss. And I appreciate what you've said about how it's actually a story about discipleship. And that's something that we would miss. And I hope you continue to explore that and write about that, because I think that would be a great thing. We need to bring that into schools, and we need to bring that into general literary education, because I think that really opens things up a lot and would benefit us all.
I think that's true. You know, when I first read The Quest of the Holy Grail, it was in a graduate French course at Yale University in the French department. And my teacher was, this guy who's renowned for his knowledge of Old French and all these other sorts of things. And we were reading it because we're reading Old French literature and learning Old French by reading Old French literature. And I was the only Christian in the course, and it was really interesting to watch them fumbling through these elements and not knowing how to put these things together. And they were just like, well, it's so bizarre. Like, what is Lancelot has this whole thing where he comes across, and it's a group of two knights fighting, and there's a larger group of knights in white and a smaller group of knights in black. And Lancelot thinks, ooh, I'm going to help the knights in black because they're smaller and I need to defend them against this larger group. And so he goes and joins them because the idea is I'll get more glory if they win because I was the guy who turned the tide. So he goes in there and fights the whole thing and does a great job, and they win. And then it turns out that the knights in white represented the Christians, and he fought for the wrong side, and it's a whole big thing. And they're like, well, why are they slamming on Lancelot? What's the deal with this? It's like, because it's a spiritual tale, right? These are all spiritual stories. And so I think that's a key piece, and you're right. We need to bring that back into the general understanding of what's going on with these. It's just a piece of the larger story of what's happening with medieval texts, as the people reading them, as our scholars reading them, they don't share the religious background and the scriptural literacy that the original readers and writers shared. Then the texts become increasingly difficult, and where they get weirder and weirder interpretations placed on them.
Right. And that is key. That's key in apologetics, is bringing these ideas back out and helping people to really power through this kind of stuff and understand it. That's why apologetics is so exciting, because it's out there. It's all over, and we can find it back in medieval writings.
That's right.
And when I read Beowulf, I can't stop talking about it to my poor middle schoolers. You don't understand how much of this is so important. But once the light bulb snaps on. They say, so this stuff was written about all the way back in 600 AD?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. It
Yeah,
really
we didn't
was.
make this up. This is not a new problem. This is
No.
Right.
And it was part of the culture.
Mhm.
So it was no surprise to read these stories of the medieval era. To read these stories, it wasn't a surprise for these people that are reading them. They're like, yes, this is what we know, and this is what we're familiar with, and this is there's the church, and there's evil, and there's goodness, and things like that. And now it's so radical to read anything like this that really, you're right. It's like this big snarl that people can't take apart because they don't have the foundational help that they need to understand the story better.
Yeah, that's right. It's like trying to read Dante when you haven't read anything else in the Western tradition. You haven't read Virgil, you haven't read Homer, you haven't read all these other things that are in Dante's own past that he's referring back to. You can still read it to great delight, and you might want to keep reading it over and over again and do your PhD on it and teach it in these types of things because it's so good. But you fundamentally are not part of the conversation that Dante is trying to be a part of. And so a lot of what's happening is just happening up here above the level of what you can notice because you're not realizing, oh, that's in response to something that had been said before, and that's weighing in on this particular argument and that sort of a thing.
Yep. I read Dante the first time just to read it, and the second time I did a deeper study. Anthony Esselin has a series out that explains every person, everybody in the rings. And suddenly everything made sense.
Yeah.
It's as if the sun broke through the clouds and I understood why he wrote what he wrote. And really, I think that's a call for us to explore these pieces deeply and get the kids, educate students so they can get this in the senior high level and carry that through into college. You got to get them before college. We have to teach each other instead of trying to sweep up the mess. We need to set it in the very beginning. Say, here, this is how amazing this story is. Let's research it and dig into it deeper. And I think that's what you really have started with the story that you contributed for us. You gave us a taste of what that story really holds, what Arthurian legend really holds for us to glean, especially in an apologetics manner. I think that was what made it such a fantastic contribution.
Well, thank you.
I could talk to you for hours about this, but I have another question for you. So much of your story is recognizing internal motivations. You talked about some of the same things in your essay as you did in the Dragons issue of Unexpected Journal, which you also contributed to. How much of part of having that true courage is recognizing the truth of and in ourselves and our motivations?
A large part, I think, right? Because courage, what I once had a pastor who said, and I don't know if he was quoting something or not, but he said, courage is not action in the absence of fear, it's action in spite of fear. And so the thing that there's always two things there when you're in a situation that calls for courage. There's the awareness of this great thing outside of yourself, the dragon or the quest or the whatever it is that is in the face of which you need to be courageous. And there's also the simultaneous recognition that there is a great disparity between it and you.
Yes.
Right? One of my favorite moments from The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is when Eustace the dragon flies and lands on the beach to try to help make everyone understand who he is. And Caspian wakes everybody up. We suddenly switch points of view and we're no longer in Eustace's point of view. And Caspian wakes everybody up and says, there's a dragon that's landed on the beach. And yes, I'm afraid it's between us and the ship. And no, there's no possibility of escape. And then Reepicheep says, sire, if I may be so bold. And Caspian cuts him off and says, no, in a very firm tone of voice, you are not to attempt single combat with it. And I love the idea of Reepicheep fighting this dragon. You know, I mean, he hasn't got a prayer. At best, he's gonna just dodge the thing forever and stab it and do no damage. And at worst, it's gonna be Bambi meets Godzilla. You know, it just squishes him, and that's the end of the whole thing. But one of the things that I always loved about Reapercheap has deep problems, guys. Reapercheap's pride is a huge issue. So remember that as you idealize Reapercheap. But one of the things that Reapercheap gets right, and this it's stronger and stronger the further you go into his story, is for him, death is never part of the calculation. He knows death can happen, but he just doesn't care. It's just not something that's worth factoring in. So he's not weighing the glory of fighting a dragon versus the possibility of dying and therefore choosing to be courageous in spite of that. He just never occurs to him that the fact that he might die should be part of the problem. Yeah, of course, but it's a dragon. I would die fighting a dragon. And that's what leads him to say his most profound thing towards the end of the Dawn Treader, which is, you guys can do what you want to do. My own plans are set. I'm going to sail east as far as the Dawn Treader will take me. And when she fails me, I'll paddle in my little coracle. And when she fails me, I'll swim with my 4 paws. And if my strength gives out and I haven't reached Aslan's country or shot over the edge of the world, then I'll sink into the waves with my nose pointed to the east, and Peepa Seep will become the head of the talking mice in Narnia. And that's one of those Puddleglum moments. You're just like, oh, it's so good. Right. But he gets there because he doesn't do the half of what's required for courage, which is compare his own size to the size of other things. He learned early on that it wasn't worth it, that he was always going to come out too small for whatever the thing was. And he just decided at some point as a baby mouse, he's always a little mouse, that wasn't going to be an issue, that he was just going to do it anyway. Right. So your question about how much of courage is seeing ourselves truly, I think quite a bit of it is. On the one hand, we need to recognize the disparity that's really there, right? The next chapter after the dragon thing, they're attacked by the sea serpent, and Reapercheap is trying to push the sea serpent off of the ship. And Lewis says he had no more hope of doing it alone than he had of lifting a cathedral, right? And I think there's that true recognition of where we are. It's part of humility that belongs to courage, right? Courage is grounded in that recognition that, yeah, there is this great disparity between me and this thing that I'm being asked to do or given the opportunity to do. But it doesn't stop at the disparity. Courage goes on beyond the disparity to something else. It goes on to look for that place that Reapercheap found, which says, whether I'm up to the task or not, if Aslan's calling me to do it, I better get doing, right? And so in the Silver Chair, when Prince Rilian is tied to the chair and he starts talking sense and he calls on them in Aslan's name to free him from the chair, and Puddleglum, Jill, and Eustace are like, uh-oh, that was the sign. Do we dare trust it? They argue back and forth, and ultimately Jill says, if only we knew what to do. And Puddleglum says, I think we do know what to do. Aslan didn't tell us that everything would work out well if we followed the signs. He didn't tell us that things would reach a happy ending. He told us to obey. And so whatever happens, we have to obey. And so Jill says, so you think it's going to work out? And he says, no, I'm Puddleglum. Of course I don't think it's going to work out, right? I'm sure he's going to kill us all, right? But he's going to kill us all in the will of Aslan. And that's the place we have to be. And so I think that this recognition of where we are is the first part of courage. But the second part of courage has got to be choosing who we want to be.
Okay, very good. I'd see when you said courage and humility, I think our model for that is Christ.
Yeah.
Absolute humility and absolute courage and obey. We just do what we are called to do.
Christ in Gethsemane, especially.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I don't want it, but that's not the most important thing right now.
Right. Pass this. Please pass this away. Pass this cup away. I don't want this, but if I have to, so be it.
Yeah.
And I think that is encapsulated so much in what Lewis wrote and what real courage truly means.
Yeah.
That's very good. Very good. All right. Well, we have one more minute until we pass on to the next section. Is there anything else that you would like to share, Junius? Anything else you'd like to add?
There's one thing I want to point people to in the story in case they miss it. There's a lot of details buried in there, and so it definitely repays close reading. But each time Galahad has to pass 3 tests, and at the end of each test, he's addressed with a different name. After the first one, he's called the son of Lancelot, and then he's called the son of Elaine the Fair, and then he's called the son of God at the end. And this is ascending order of holiness, as he's going from his father, who's problematic, to his mother, who is very pure, and then to God himself. As he successively passes these trials, he is stepping more into who he really is, and ascending through the levels of his personality. And so that's one of the things readers can keep an eye out for as they go through the story, is the way in which Gawain himself, Galahad himself, is progressing and realizing himself as the Grail Knight as he goes through these adventures.
Excellent. That's a great thing to end this with, and impetus to get us all to read the story. Read it online. You can go to unexpectedjournal.com, order the copy. Thank you very much, Junius. I appreciate talking to you about this, and thank you for going deeper and deeper into the Arthurian legend with us.
Thank you for publishing my piece. It's such a joy to be in the journal again.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to our launch party. We are at a first intermission. We've already had 2 great segments go on today already, and we've talked about the legend of Arthur, and we've talked about, Annie, remind me of the title of the one we just did.
It was Junius, Galahad and the End of the Quest.
Yes, and the End of the Quest. And now we are going to have a chance for you, the listener, watcher, to win something. So this is so fun. So you're going to enter to win. It's a hashtag Camelot. Hashtag Camelot. Yeah, there it is, right there on the ticker. So hashtag Camelot. To win, I think we'll show you what you're going to win here in a minute. I don't remember what we're winning, but you're winning something. That's super exciting.
I think it was up there before we popped in.
It was. It came up
There
there.
it is.
Hey, look at
Yay.
that gorgeous cover by Virginia. So beautiful. So this can be yours. You need to enter to win. Hashtag Camelot. Yes. So in our schedule, we still have a whole lot of great stuff coming your way today. So we've only done segments 1 and 2. Let's take a look at the schedule. We've done the Legend of Arthur and the Courage of Camelot. We're going to discuss C.S. Lewis and Camelot, the Haven of Camelot, Arthur in Renewal, and Arthur in Inspiration. So make sure you stick around for the rest of the day, because we have an amazing schedule coming up. And again, don't forget to enter to win. Hashtag Camelot. And
Yes.
talk about our free digital book. You can sign up.
That was our first one, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, that was the very beginning.
The very beginning, volume 1 and journal 1. That's where it all began.
It all started with the abolition of man.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's a foundational work, and so we started off with that one. And I believe if you're signing up for our newsletter at unexpectedjournal.com, there it is. What, I'm pointing the wrong way. There it is. There it is. There it is.
There.
Right there.
I always point backwards when I'm on the screen.
I do too. It flips me around, and so then I have to be weird and awkward and do things like this. All right. So you're signing up for our newsletter at unexpectedjournal.com/free book, and you're going to get a free digital edition of our inaugural issue on the abolition of man. This is one of C.S. Lewis's just pivotal foundational works, and it's just chock full of great philosophy and theology, and it's an interesting commentary on modern education. So I recommend it for everyone. This is a great issue, and you can get it for free. So it's hard to beat that. Here we go.
Oh, there we go. Yes, please give. Your donations make our publishing possible. This is a quarterly labor of love, and we're thrilled that it's out all over the world. There's copies of it at the Wade Center. There's copies of it at the Kilns, C.S. Lewis's home. And we're so thrilled that it's now getting into other countries. One of our writers has taken it to Africa, boxes of them to Africa, and sharing them around schools there and churches. And we can now claim worldwide notoriety.
Yes, world domination.
World domination, one page at a time. And if you go back into our website, you can go into our archives, and the archives include every journal that was published. We have a lot of really fun things that we've explored, like dystopia, the dystopian fiction, current culture like film and music. Every season, Advent season, we have a special issue where we highlight a special author. So we've done Tolkien, Chesterton, Lewis. Coming up, we decided to dive into the Russians, and that's Dostoevsky. And if I keep writing it, keep typing it, I will remember how to spell Dostoevsky. So a fall coming up, we have Play and Prayer. That's currently being worked on right now, which includes fun topics like baseball, fishing, hiking, horseback riding,
dance, theater,
Yep.
Leisure, think leisure, right? Leisure activities, yeah, fantastic.
And leisure is a holy undertaking, and that's why we're exploring it. And there's lots of different ideas for leisure. And Carla has just let us know that there is someone who wrote for a dystopian issue. So go back to dystopian issue and look up that author, and there's so much good reading to do. George MacDonald, we did an issue on George MacDonald, and oh my goodness, I don't know. You can get lost. You can lose hours in our website.
Those are quality hours. Quality
hours.
You know, it's like a quality calorie. You want it to be worth it, and this is worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're a teacher and you have students doing research in all kinds of topics, this is a great place to look. We've had our articles quoted in thesis projects, in research papers, in other journals, and people have used them to springboard other research. So share them with other teachers, and I think that it's a great resource for educators, ministers, churches, homeschool, co-ops, just any place that you're going to be talking about big ideas, great ideas, writers, imagination, faith. This is the journal for you. And there really is something for everyone. So I think it's just not something, you don't want to miss it. Don't miss it. Go through, look through. And if you are a writer and you love to write, this might be a journal to which you might submit. So we have a submissions page on the website, and you can go and look at the upcoming issues, kind of get a feel. I would go back and read through some of the old issues, get a feel for what's in there. And if you have something, you can submit it, and we'll see. You might be featured on the next watch party. Who knows? So go and read the submission page for an unexpected journal and see if you might become one of our very next writers.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. That would be really great. The issue, the King Arthur Legendarium that we have, that we're talking about today, features a lot of poetry, which I personally love the beauty. Carice, you submitted a lovely poem in a, we'll talk about later, in a style that I was not familiar with. We have the prologue to Malcolm Guite's book that's coming out soon, and it is just wonderfully lyrically written. I just want to read it out loud. I was reading it out loud to myself because it's so beautiful. And Donald Williams submitted this fantastic twist on Arthur that, again, it's pages and pages long, but so beautiful. And you are exposed to a lot of different styles of poetry. And I challenge anyone to read the book and not fall in love with poetry. Sometimes we want to push poetry aside and say, it's too much, it's too fluffy, it's too fancy. But really, give it a chance. And I think really adding a poem a day to every day of your life.
Yes.
Expands your heart, expands your vocabulary, gives you such a dose of beauty every day. And almost every issue I think that we've had has included poetry.
I think so. I can't think of one that doesn't have any in it. So we'll have to, that's a good challenge. I need to go back and look through and see. Okay, Carla is reminding us, y'all, don't forget #Camelot so you can enter to win. Okay, so #Camelot to enter to win. We're going to remind you about that until we have a winner. so #Camelot to win. Enter in the chat, she says. So to win a free issue of the King Arthur issue. So if you don't win, you can, I guess, buy it on Amazon. But she says, let us know when you're ready to spin. I mean,
give it a spin.
Ready when you are. We love the drama, so spin.
Yay! Let's play.
Let's spin. I don't know how to know when we win, but I'm ready for it. Winner, Charlotte. Charlotte, you are the winner. So Charlotte, you get a free King Arthur issue. So it's so exciting. So make sure you claim your issue. Way to go, Charlotte. We're going to have some more chances to win, I think, later. I'm going to say that. I just said that. I hope it's true. Later in the other intermissions. So don't give up if you didn't win this time.
Yep.
You might win next time.
Yes.
And if you don't win, you can always buy it on Amazon, or we're at all the many places that you can find an unexpected journal. So
yes,
8th Day Books carries some of the issues, I know, and it's just so exciting. But once again, we don't get paid for this. So your donations and your patronage of buying the issues really does help us to continue this ministry effort.
All right, we have a new segment coming up that you will be hosting, Carice.
Yes.
Lewis and Camelot.
Yes, it's called C.S. Lewis and Camelot, and we are looking very forward to that because we all know we love C.S. Lewis around here. So, and yes, we're just having a whole day of Camelot, so that's fantastic.
I know. I'm being swept away. I want to go to a joust or something to celebrate.
Yes, I was like, we should go to I don't know. I feel like we should. I almost thought, like, should we dress up for this?
No, I thought it'd be kind of weird if I showed up with a crown.
I kind of debated. We should have talked.
I do have a fairy wreath that I could wear that I wore for. Maybe I'll put that on my head for the next round when I have to host the Haven of Camelot. I'll put on my fairy crown that I always wear at, of course, every historically accurate Renaissance fair that I've ever attended.
Absolutely, yes.
You know, because they're historically accurate, and you learn so much at the Renaissance fair.
Yeah, you get to watch the different artisans and see the different people and
watch the jousting. So sometimes see somebody show up in a suit of armor or chainmail. You just never know. But I do have a wreath, so maybe I'll pop that on for our next go around, kind of shift. You know, you have to have costume shifting.
That's right. Yeah. Well, the teacher next door teaches the medievals, so maybe I'll sneak over there and borrow a crown and come back with a crown on. You never know. It could get crazy, y'all. This is why you don't want to go away from this live stream, because you just don't know.
You don't know what to expect.
But I can tell you what's going to happen next, because next is our segment number 3, C.S. Lewis and Camelot, and we'll see you there.
Yes, see you there.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. This is segment number 3 of our King Arthur launch party for an unexpected journal. And this is, I believe, C.S. Lewis and Camelot. It says The Haven of Camelot, but I think it's C.S. Lewis and Camelot because we are going to talk about C.S. Lewis. I'm your host, Carice Gilland. Hey, there it is, C.S. Lewis and Camelot. Before we get started, I'm here today with Stephen. Am I going to say your last name correctly if I say Bedard?
Yep.
Hey, beautiful. Okay. So if you will introduce yourself, tell our audience a little about you. Tell us about the piece that you wrote for the journal.
Sure. Well, I am Stephen Bedard, and I am a Baptist pastor in Nova Scotia, Canada. Also, I'm a chaplain in the Canadian Armed Forces in the reserves. I'm a writer, both on the academic and popular side. I try to do a little bit of both. And as well, I've been involved in apologetics really since I came back to faith in my early 20s, and have been writing in that area, and more recently have gotten interested in disability ministry and disability theology. And so if you look at my CV, I kind of go back and forth between apologetics and disability theology, and there's a lot of connection there actually, but I like to write on both of those. And C.S. Lewis has really been an important part of my faith development. When I first started reading him, and I was really a brand new Christian, and I decided to start with Miracles, which is not the easiest book to start with, but I went with that one, and I loved it. It was there was something there that really captured a part of the logical side of me, and faith really made sense. And so I've appreciated that, and then slowly have moved over to some of his fiction, both the Chronicles of Narnia and the Space Trilogy.
Awesome. And can you tell us, just give us like a little trailer, a little summary of what your particular piece is about, and like connecting C.S. Lewis a little bit to the Arthur idea, just in case there are people who really are like, I don't know how that's connected.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, that's that disconnect is part of why I was interested in doing this. Again, I was late in reading the Space Trilogy. I got appointed to the Chronicles of Narnia quite early, but someone had mentioned that C.S. Lewis had written a trilogy, a science fiction trilogy, and I thought, really, the C.S. Lewis who wrote Narnia and with Lucy and Edmund, like, they're science fiction. And so I thought, I got to try this out. And so and I read the first 2 parts of the trilogy, with the Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra, and I'm like, okay, okay, I can see this. And then I got to the final part of the trilogy, that Hideous Strength, and there was a radical shift in the tone of the books. It almost came across like he had this other idea for a novel, and then he thought, you know what, I can fit this in with the Space Trilogy. That's what it felt like to me. And so I'm reading about this, and there's some little hints about Merlin, and I didn't really know what to make of that. And then finally Merlin appears, and I thought, really? Like, that's not the first thought of who is going to be who's going to make a guest appearance in a science fiction story, especially coming from a Christian worldview. Is it going to be Merlin, the wizard, who's going to be appearing? It didn't seem like a natural appearance, but as I read it, I was really drawn to it, and especially the portrayal of Merlin. And that's what my article is about, is how Lewis is using Merlin, because he's not the kindly wizard that we are expecting. He's not the Gandalf or the Dumbledore who's just kind of there, who's got power that's kind of hidden, ready to come out, but is quite kind and gentle until he needs to shift gears. This Merlin basically appears and says, "Okay, who do I need to kill first? I'm ready to do some violence, and that's what I'm all about." And it just seemed really strange. And so I really wanted to dig into that and look at what Lewis was trying to do with Merlin, and how the overlap between even how some of the main characters there, as they're struggling with how Merlin is going to play a role in their fight against evil, because Merlin himself seems to be pretty rough, and you kind of wonder which side he might be on, and that nervousness, that anxiety of this dangerous wizard that seems so unpredictable. To look at that, and then to look at how in apologetics sometimes theology is scary, and how we understand God, it doesn't fit the nice, neat package that we might want. And sometimes we're pushed towards looking in some scary spots, and God might want to stretch us, especially with some of the resources that are made available to us.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting how you pulled out Merlin and talked about him. And he is so fascinating because he is such a different kind of Merlin, you know, especially if you way fast forward the Arthur legends and go to like Disney's Sword in the Stone, right? Where he's like, he's got the Converse and the Hawaiian shirt when he's on vacation. Like this Merlin is a little unhinged. He's electrostatic. He comes raging out. I mean, he's, you know, vengeful and scary and not manageable, right? And I think that is a fascinating, and then he's just like zoof in the middle of this story where you're like, what even is happening? So
yes, and even a major part of the plot is that both sides are searching for Merlin. Nice, which is the organized evil organization, who's the main antagonist, they're searching for Merlin because they know that they can use Merlin for their purposes. And Ransom and his colleagues are looking for Merlin, and it's this shift. It's a kind of a competition to see who's going to get to him first. And ultimately, it's Merlin shows up at the door, and it's kind of a scary moment. And I think that if I was the one who answered the door, I might be a little hesitant to open that.
No one's home. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we like jumped right to it, which is fabulous. But both of us have read those trilogies. But let's pretend somebody watching hasn't. Can you kind of step them through a little bit, like an explanation of what's going on, without major spoilers, obviously, in the trilogies? So like, who is Ransom? What's been happening? And then you get to this third book, and then it's yet another reason I think Merlin is kind of bizarre, and awesome, because it's my favorite one of the series. But
yeah,
can you talk us through the 3 books? Yeah,
sure. And I'll actually start with by giving kind of an overview of sort of the cosmology that is going on, because that's really what ties all 3 books together. So the idea is there are beings that we'll just, for the sake of simplicity, we'll call them angels. A different name is used in the book. And so there's all kinds of these angels all around. And each planet in our solar system gets a specific angel that is in charge of the planet, which sounds great. That's no problem at all. The problem is that one of those angels has rebelled against God, who again is given a different name. And that angel is the angel of Earth, and it's who we would consider Satan, but in the books is referred to as the bent one. And so meanwhile, there are all of these things going on in the solar system on the spiritual realm, and they understand that Earth is in rebellion. And so that's why the first book is called Out of the Silent Planet, because Earth has been it's been silenced in terms of its ongoing communication with the other planets and the other angels of the planets, because under the Bent One they have rebelled, and that's happened with the fall. And so that's kind of the setting for everything that's going on. Now, in the first book, what happens is you have this man, Dr. Ransom, who Lewis partially patterned after Tolkien. He's very much like him. He's a philologist, and he's walking along, and as often happens, he got kidnapped and thrown into a rocket ship. Absolutely. And they head off to Mars. I know it happens all the time. I hate when it happens. It's so disruptive. He goes to Mars with these two other fellows, but they're bringing him not because they want him to see how wonderful Mars is, but rather because they're going to offer him as a sacrifice to the Martians. Now, I should also mention, in terms of the style here, when we talk about the various influences on C.S. Lewis, we don't realize that C.S. Lewis actually really liked H.G. Wells as well. He disagreed with a lot of Wells' his worldview, especially after Lewis's conversion. But he did like how he wrote, and especially his story, The Men in the Moon. And you can see a lot of similarities between that work by Lewis and what happens in Mars, or in this space trilogy. And so they arrive in Mars, and Ransom gets away. What we find, though, on this planet is a whole society that's there, but they never fell. Their Adam, whoever that was, never submitted to evil, never gave in to temptation. And so you have a whole society kind of showing us what it would have looked like perhaps on Earth if the fall had never happened. So I won't go through all the details, other than to say that Ransom gets back to Earth, and then it brings us the second book, Paralandra, where this time he goes to Venus, which is Paralandra is the other name for that. And again, it's the focus here is the idea of the fall, but now instead of coming to a civilization that has already developed, he's appearing just as their Adam and Eve have been created. And so he is spending some time talking to their Eve and trying to encourage her to stay faithful. And meanwhile, one of the guys who had kidnapped him in the first book has been possessed by Satan, and they end up having this conflict as the Satan figure is trying to cause Eve to stumble and to rebel and to reproduce what took place on Earth. I won't spoil how it all works out, but it's a pretty interesting ending, and it's one of the books that I try to imagine what it would look like if it was ever made into a movie, because it could be quite
yes. The special effects would be amazing. Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, somebody needs to get on that. We need to I don't know who we email, but we need to email somebody. That'd be awesome.
I think so.
So you have these other two books, and then you've already noted you get to this third one and it's a little different.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that difference. Like, if I'm a reader and I made it to the first one, I made it to the second one, and now I'm opening this third one, kind of expecting the same thing. What's going to surprise me in the third book?
Well, one of the things that you'll notice right away is the first two books are coming from Dr. Ransom's perspective. And so if you had just picked up random books and you started in The Hideous Strength, you wouldn't necessarily know it was part of the Space Trilogy, because Ransom's not even appearing for the first, I think, half or maybe a little bit more of the book. Yeah, it just feels like something else is going on. The other difference is it all takes place on Earth. There's nothing happening in space. even though it's part of the space trilogy. But I mean, Earth is one of the planets, so I guess in a way we are in space. And so it feels very different. So there's different characters that are the main characters. It's a husband and wife, and the husband is working for a university, and you get a sense of the tediousness of the meetings that take place here. And I think Lewis was drawing from his enormous experience in those kinds of meetings. And he gets drawn into this organization called NICE, which is the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments. And I will give you one spoiler, that NICE is not nice. Okay, that's the thing you can realize. And he gets drawn into that, and there's all kinds of bizarre things that are happening. And eventually Ransom appears. And we also, this is another one of the shifts, is that before, he just comes across as this university professor who is thrown into some extraordinary circumstances, trying to figure out what to do. And, normally a philologist is not necessarily wrestling with Satan. So it seems really bizarre. But in this book, Ransom seems to have come to a better understanding of who he is. And he refers to himself as the Pendragon. And he is understood to belong to this unbroken line of people who have served since the time of King Arthur. He refers to himself as the Fisher King, which is one of the titles for King Arthur. And he's not physically King Arthur in the sense that King Arthur has awoken, but he is playing the role of that. And so that's part of why he has some clout with Merlin, because anyone else is terrified of Merlin because he's violent, he's unpredictable. But because Ransom has the authority of King Arthur, he is able to command him to do what he has to do. And so again, that brings about another difference in how this book plays with the others.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating because it makes that relationship between the two of them more natural to the reader, because it makes sense that a King Arthur connection, and I don't want to spoil too much for people, but would inhabit a relationship with Merlin in that way. So that makes sense, definitely in the book. So that's a great summation. One of the other questions we really want to talk about, and that you come into this in your essay, which I totally got so interested and sidetracked thinking about various examples of this. But you were the title, has the phrase, I think, messy apologetic in it. Can you talk about that? Talk about the messy apologetic of these things that we've been talking about, like culturally, because a cultural and imaginative apologetic isn't typically completely straightforward unless it's just an allegory. So how is this messy, and then how does that relate to cultural and imaginative apologetics on a broader scale?
So I come at this not necessarily as a C.S. Lewis scholar, and I'm definitely not an Arthurian scholar, but I have been involved in apologetics again since I returned to faith during my undergraduate years. And one of the things that I've noticed in my experience interacting with other apologists is a desire to have a really neat, clean, solid boundary kind of apologetics. And there's often a concern that when we're using an argument, or we're using sources, or we're referring to a particular person, we don't want to be tainted by anything that we might disagree with. There is that fear that, well, if I refer to this, I also know that this person had this different belief that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, and so I don't want to endorse everything that they stand for. So I'm not going to use that unless I can have a completely pure pedigree. Then it can't be used in my discussions about faith, in my defense of the of Christianity and the gospel. And I see this a lot, and this sometimes ends up causing there's been conflicts between apologists, because one will look at another and say, well, I really don't like what they say about this. And so even if I might agree even if I agree with 75% of what they say, I better not use anything, because I don't want to unwittingly endorse what's going on. And I call for more of a messy apologetics that is more pragmatic in many ways, to look at what works, to pull on the things that are happening in our culture around us. I think about St. Augustine. He referred to this as plundering the Egyptians.
Yes.
And he got a lot of pushback because he would pull on philosophical concepts that were not Christian. They belong to the Neoplatonic philosophy of the day, but he found it useful. And so he compared that to when the Israelites were leaving Egypt under the time of Moses, and they were told to plunder the Egyptians, to take the gold and all the other things from them, and to bring them. And it ended up that the tabernacle and a lot of the instruments that were used in the tabernacle were made from that gold that was used by the Egyptians. And so Augustine was arguing that these things are just available to us, and we use what works. And there are lots of opportunities for us to do things. And I give a number of examples. A lot of the focus that I have in my apologetics is responding to the Jesus myth theory, which is the argument that Jesus never existed as a historical person, but rather is based upon pagan myths. And I think one of the best books that was written on this was by Bart Ehrman. And Bart Ehrman is no friend to the church. He writes books that are devastating for a lot of people. A lot of people have walked away because of things that Bart Ehrman has written, as he has attacked a lot of the doctrines and the beliefs of historical Christianity. But in his book, Did Jesus Exist? It is excellent, and it is actually devastating to the Jesus myth theory. And I love how because the Jesus myth theory has been embraced by a lot of atheists, and they just assume that he, as a agnostic or atheist or however he self-describes, would just naturally be sympathetic. But as a historian, he can't do that. And so there's no reason not to use what Bart Ehrman.
So he's not the historical evidence. Yeah.
So and there's all kinds of examples, and I give a few more in the article, but you'll have to read that.
Yeah, I loved some of your. I'm going to ask you just a couple popular culture examples. So like a lot of times people are like, oh well, I could see. Well, I don't know. They feel dicey about certain theologians, but you also say like, here are some other popular culture examples. I think one of them you name is Star Wars, right? Like, obviously the, yin and yang is not Christianity, but there could be apologetic value to the story itself. So what are some other like popular culture things? Like if you, as a pastor, were recommending to another pastor who said, hey, I would really like to embrace this idea, where would I look? What could I use in my messy apologetic? Like what would really actually be a quality story culturally to look to?
Yeah, well, that's great. And I just will say ahead of time, when I came back to faith, I was at quite a conservative church that basically saw just about all the stuff that I currently like as being satanic. So that would include Star Wars, Star Trek, definitely Harry Potter was a real bad one. And yet there's so much there that is good. I mean, we see that in our superhero movies very often. That is a big part of it. I would say like the most recent Guardians of the Galaxy movie. There's so much that is in there People had all kinds of expectations that it was just going to be a real funny movie. But the way we see this high evolutionary trying to create perfection, and being willing to throw away everything that doesn't meet his level. And then meanwhile, you have Rocket, who is not the cutest looking raccoon, who doesn't even think he's a raccoon, but he has all these gifts that, and then finally, when it's discovered, all the guy wants to do is take his brain. Meanwhile, Rocket is able to recognize the value in other beings. They get, when they're getting off the ship, they're rescuing people, they rescue all these cute little children. And he's like, no, there's other beings here that might not be so cute, but they deserve to live too. And there's plenty of things in there. I'm also a big fan of The Walking Dead. I think that The Walking Dead, the various series there, there's some really good things there, because if anyone who has watched them, they're not so much about humans versus zombies or walkers, but they're about humans who have embraced the dark side, who have given in to their darkest nature, and those who are willing to live a life of mutual love and support, and to see the best of each other. In the original Walking Dead series, the fact that Negan, who was one of the most horrible villains that they had, he gets redeemed by the end. And there's all kinds of stories of redemption that are found in that particular series. So it's all over. If you're willing to look, we will see it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. This has been amazing and great. We have about 2 minutes left, so I want to give you a chance to tell our audience where to find you, if you have a website, or you have links, or what you're writing about next, your next project.
Sure.
Yeah, let us know. Okay,
so I have numerous websites, but you can get to all of them through StephenJBedard.com. So it's Stephen with a PH, just like you see in my name there, StephenJBedard.com, and that will link to all of the various things that I'm working on. I do have a couple of projects. A lot of it went on hold because I was finishing my Doctor of Ministry degree that I did, and I finished that last year. So now I got a little bit more time to work on things. I've been working on a book called Why I'm Not an Atheist. Now that's my working title. I also know that every publisher ends up changing it, and the author doesn't have much say as to what the final title is, but that tells you a little bit of what it is. I'm looking at not so much a list of apologetic arguments, but I'm putting it in the context of my own story, trying to tap into that. So instead of just assuming that there's a bunch of people who just want a list of arguments, a lot of people today want to hear, how does this stuff happen in real life? So I'm taking people through my journey as I wrestled with what it was like being an atheist, and then coming out, just like C.S. Lewis, really, becoming a theist, and then afterwards becoming a Christian. I'm also trying to work on a novel, sort of a fantasy kind of novel that I've worked on, but again, I put it down, and my children keep nagging me to pick it back up. So I'm hoping to get back at that at some point.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, we'll look you up. If you are looking for his website, it's down on the ticker tape, all typed out, so you can find that. I have to tell you that when Carla was first telling me about you, she said you were Canadian, but I thought she said comedian.
Well, so, can I tell you, I actually have a TikTok channel where I do dad jokes.
So see, I knew it. I knew it. Yes. Did not mishear that.
Dad Joker 777. Just look for that on TikTok.
So don't miss that. Don't miss that, y'all. All right, that's the end of our segment. We're out of time for segment number 3, C.S. Lewis and Camelot. Thank you so much for being here. It's been awesome.
Thank you. God bless.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Camilo.
Do we have a cat who's doing like co-star? Or is that a cardboard? Oh, it's a real cat. That cat was so, I could go get mine. I have 6, and fortunately, none of them are volunteering to pop in here at this point in time. But welcome to Camilo and his cat. What's your cat's name? Oh, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Sure. Can you hear
There
me?
we go.
Loud and clear.
Loud and clear.
Oh, sorry about that.
So we have Camilo and his sidekick. And Josh. Welcome, guys. This is going to be great.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so glad that you were paired together for my segment. 2 really incredibly rich essays, academic, something really to examine, take apart, talk about, and I'm glad that you're paired together because this is going to be great. All right, so first, Josh, why don't you go ahead? We're going to introduce, you guys can introduce yourselves. Josh, you go first. What are you doing? Give us some background, etc.
Sure. So my name is Josh Herring. I wear a lot of hats, so I'll just kind of run through a few of those. I am currently in my last week of being a Dean of Classical Education for Thales Academy. I am defending my dissertation 5 days from now. I'm defending on next Wednesday.
Wow.
And so assuming that goes well, I get a title change, but then I'll also be starting a new position as a professor of classical education for Thales College. So I'm very excited about that. I was really excited to find out about this issue of An Unexpected Journal because I have a deep love for Arthurian literature and legend, and I did the Arthuriana class at Faulkner I think that was 3 summers ago. Dr. Lockhart and Dr. Fullman led that class, and I thought at the time I wanted to write a dissertation on Arthuriana, and then decided I did not want to write that, but was really excited to find a place to pour some of that love for the Arthurian story into it. I've taught Lemort. I've taught Roger Greene's version of the Knights of the Round Table. So I'm a longtime fan, and I'm really excited to get to talk about that with you guys. The essay I put together also brings in Edmund Spenser and Fairy Queen a bit more than Mallory, and I'm sure we'll get to some of that as we go. But that's me. I'm also a debate coach and a podcaster. My show is called The Optimistic Curmudgeon. If anybody listening wants to follow the show, you can find that on YouTube. I'll put the link in there in the comment in the chat box on YouTube in a second. But yeah, that's me, Camilo.
Fantastic. Look forward to talking about it. All right, Camilo.
Yeah, Josh, it's good to see you again. We've been in several classes together.
This works out great.
It's
and
amazing.
Remember, you guys can talk back and forth between each other as well during this. Please feel free.
Yeah, but we were in those classes together years ago. I mean, I haven't seen you in so long. But I'm currently an instructor of English at Fort Hays State University in Northwest Kansas. Starting in the fall, I'm being promoted to assistant professor of English. I just defended my dissertation in December of 2021, and that was one of the criteria for the promotion. So yeah, I can't believe you're defending in 5 days as well. That takes me back to when I was in that position. You'll do great, I'm sure. Just like Josh, actually, I had an interest in the matter of Britain and for a long time, and I actually thought about doing my dissertation on something related to that as well. I ended up going in a different direction too with Russell Kirk's fiction, and I mentioned Kirk a little bit in my paper as a sort of framing device. But my paper is about it focuses more on Alfred Tennyson's version of the tales and the Idols of the King, and it's called Sanctuary and Refuge in the Idols, and it was actually prompted by a call for papers by an academic journal that was looking for articles related to those topics like refugees and things like that, and I thought, why don't I put something together on Tennyson, who I always wanted to write something about, and I did that. This was years ago. The journal was that slow in getting back to me about the response. They finally did it and said, hey, we didn't get enough submissions. We canceled it. And right at that moment, I saw something on Facebook about an unexpected journal putting together an issue related to Arthur. And I had taken classes with Zach and a lot of other folks associated with the journal too. So it's always been on my radar. I just never had a chance to submit something to it. So I was very excited to do that here and very honored to be included among the writers. And
Fantastic.
Year of Josh. Thank you.
Well, it worked out really well. And for those of you out there, he mentions Zach. Zach was the former editor-in-chief of An Unexpected Journal, and he passed this honor on to the board members so he could pursue other things in life. He's still there as the red phone call that I had to make several times since I had to do this one without a lot of tech knowledge. So Zach was always there to bail me out, but you guys know Zach, and he is still a part of us, just that he's not here live today. But yeah, we all have a great association and great friendship with Zach. So, all right. Well, you know what? Part of what excites me about both of your papers that you submitted was that you brought in authors to examine Tennyson and Fairy Queen, Spenser's Fairy Queen. And again, like I was talking to Junius, we need to bring these back off the dusty bookshelf and get into them, read them, study them, have classes on them. And I think first I'll go to you, Josh, because when I was reviewing all of these and editing them, I will readily admit I have not read all of the Fairy Queen. I have copies of it, but I think that's probably more common than any of us want to admit. We want to say that we've read the Fairy Queen. Oh yes, Spenser, love him, but we haven't. So just to introduce us to your piece, Josh, could you talk a little bit about the letter to Raleigh that Spenser wrote, and then Images of Life that C.S. Lewis wrote that contradicts what Spenser wrote? Could you just kind of guide us into an introduction for that?
Sure, it's a great question, and I was there in that same spot of having wanting to be able to say I'd read Spenser. The first year I taught high school English, there was a line about we had to teach something from the Fairy Queen, and then there was just that you either love it or you hate it, word in parentheses, excerpts, completely up to instructor's discretion. So I used my discretion to skip it entirely because I had no idea who Red Cross Knight was. I didn't know what Una was. I didn't know any of it. Probably this story starts, I think, 4 years ago now. I was at Camilla. I think you were there. Were you at the Kirk Center for that class with Faulkner 4 years ago? Am I right? Yeah. So Jason Jewell's our program head, and he got a grant to set up an intensive class at the Russell Kirk Center in Mecosta. And Camilla and I were both there. It was the first year they'd had that class. And I sat down at dinner one night next to a guy named Dr. Ben Lockard. I might be dinging. Am I dinging? If so, I want to close that. Okay. Sitting down next to at dinner with Dr. Ben Lockard, and we were talking, and I mentioned the fact that I always wanted to read the Fairy Queen. Little did I know that Dr. Lockard is a Spenserian. That was his initial academic love. And he was like, well, in that case, we should do a tutorial on it. And so I put the paperwork together, and the following semester we read the Fairy Queen together, and we spent a whole semester reading it because it is dense. Actually, hang on one second.
I love it when we pull references off of our shelves. That's awesome.
So this literally is if you can just see how thick this thing is. This is the reigning academic edition of the Fairy Queen that he had me work from. And so the Fairy Queen is a very brief intro for listeners and viewers who haven't read it. It's an allegorical poem. Lewis is very clear that he thinks it's not really an epic poem. It doesn't really fit the genre of epic poetry, but it's an allegorical poem set in a not terribly well-defined fairyland. Come back to that in a second. It exists in 6 books with a coda, and there is a raging debate in Spencer scholarship about whether or not it's complete or incomplete, because in Spencer's original plan, it was going to be 12 books. And he died before writing book 7. So anyway, where this got really interesting, when by the time the end of the semester came around, I had to come up with a paper topic. I got really intrigued because Spencer, while he's writing, I think it's either book 2 or book 3, he wrote this letter to Sir Walter Raleigh, where he outlines what he's attempting to do. And as I'm sure you both know, whenever you get an author who writes a complex text actually tell you what the point is, that's really interesting, because that solves some of our many hermeneutical problems. It's like, great, the author told me what it's all about. Well, except that in the letter to Raleigh, Spencer explains that what he's really trying to do is provide these images of different virtues. And he goes through and explains which character is supposed to line up with which virtue. And then he gets to Arthur, and Arthur is supposed to be the Aristotelian virtue of magnificence. And this is the problem for Lewis, because Lewis then comes back, and Lewis, I learned this later as I was working on the dissertation, Lewis wrote a ton about Spencer. He wrote a chapter in the Oxford History of the English Language about Spencer's Fairy Queen. It's the last chapter of the Allegory of Love. But his actual class lectures were collected together from the notes taken by one of his students and then published as Images of Life. So that's a posthumous publication that Lewis did not himself do or authorize, but they're really good. And they're like word for word most likely what Lewis said.
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
In the Images for Life is what I ended up working with for this article. Lewis goes through and says the big problem here is if you go back to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, magnificence is the quality of being really rich and spending your money like you're really rich, which is great. I'm a poor academic. I have been the recipient of much magnificence from wealthy donors at college and at conferences along the years. It's great. But that's not what Arthur is doing. So part of what my paper is then trying to do is figure out, okay, the author says this, a world-renowned scholar of Spencerian literature says, no, he's not doing this. How do we reconcile that? What exactly is going on? Because Arthur is one of the most consistent characters throughout the Fairy Queen. He shows up in every book. He shows up almost always in Canto 8. And he seems to interact with the key virtue figure in each book. Oh. And so what does he have to do? Why does Spencer lean so heavily on him? All of that is kind of what I'm trying to get at. I can say the answers if you want, but I don't want to give it all away if we're trying to use this as a teaser. But that's kind of what I was trying to get at. And it was really fun to wade through how do we still respect what the author says about his own work and yet deal with what he actually does, which is different than what he says he's doing. And it was
challenging. That's challenging contradiction to try to reconcile. That makes my head spin. That's a complicated thought. But your paper goes into so many. It's footnoted, cited. It's really wonderful. So you lay out your paper in a way that I can understand what is going on. So I appreciate what you've done here, and pairing Lewis and Spencer is just kind of fun.
Yeah, I read the article last night, and great article, Josh, and just put me in the mood to crack open the Fairy Queen again.
Yeah, I know. Now I want to go back to it. I have copies of the Fairy Queen. I see them up on my shelf.
Oh, yeah.
They're this tall. They're leather bound. They're 200 years old. I don't know how those people read those, but
don't read them.
It's like 1-point type.
Yeah. Oh.
But I started to read them, and it's beautiful to read. I think I need your book that you held up and showed us.
It helps a lot.
Yep, that's it.
This is it's just Spencer the Fairy Queen, 2nd edition, edited by A.C. Hamilton, and a string of Japanese scholars are the sub-editors, which I find fascinating, because I would never have expected there to be like this subset of Japanese scholars who just love Spencer. But that's Hiroshi Yamashita, Toshiyuka Suzuki and Shohachi Fukuda. Like,
Fantastic.
it's amazing. One thing I will say about if you do want to get into Spenser, just the kind of like your first experience reading Shakespeare, you just have to trust that you can figure out the slightly archaic language. It's not as big a barrier as it initially appears. But if you can just get into it and force yourself to read it, like suddenly it will click and it starts to make sense.
Yeah.
But I think that's the hardest part of starting reading Spenser.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is I think this is an allegory of love. Lewis made the fascinating claim that reading Spenser is actually good for our mental health.
Really? I'm gonna have to find that. I have that book. I'm gonna have to pull it off my shelf and read that specifically. Now
I can send you the page number. I have to go find the footnote, but I can send you the specific page number. But he thinks that Spenser is so good at describing positive images of life, and he just restores your faith in the joy and wonder and beauty of the world, that if you're feeling kind of depressed, Lewis would not tell you to go to a therapist. He wouldn't tell you to go pull some medicine off the shelf. He'd say, well, if you're feeling blue, you should go read some Edmund Spenser.
Okay. Well, and so our assignment to all of our watchers and listeners to this episode, your assignment this week is to get yourself a copy of Spenser, the Fairy Queen, and start to pick through it. It's honestly, it's good to do that. And once you do get the rhythm for that kind of archaic language, it does click. And then when you go back and read something that's been written modern day, it's hollow and boring and empty and gray and flat. So
and if the Fairy Queen intimidates you because it is thick, Spenser was an excellent poet. Everything that he wrote is worth reading. He wrote an excellent sonnet cycle, Amoretti. He wrote his wedding songs and things like that. I mean, just pick up a collection of his work and see how you like that, and that should put you in the mood to explore his Arthur.
Excellent. All right, Camilla, I want to go into a question about, I thought it was so interesting. I never thought about doing a haven, this safety for the lost. It's a refuge that you wrote about your papers. So you talk about the universal desire to find a haven, particularly an inner haven in right actions. Can you share a few thoughts about what it is in the story of Arthur that evokes this promise?
Yeah, well, like I said, the idea for the article came about because I saw a call for papers, and they wanted papers related to havens, sanctuaries, refuges, and the people who are associated with them, so like refugees and asylum seekers and everything like that. And as part of my research for my dissertation into Dr. Kirk's fiction, I obviously learned a lot about his life and so on. And both of you probably know this, but Kirk was very generous in welcoming people to his own home, to Piety Hill. He had single, unwed mothers, refugees, and people who just had nowhere else to go that he took in and provided for on his own dime. And I was thinking about that in relation to the call to papers that I saw, and I was, this was for a journal that specializes in the early modern period, and I was thinking about the Arthurian legends and trying to put it all together. The version of those legends that I know best is from Tennyson. So that was the one that interested me from the start. I mean, I just love the Idylls of the King. I think they're so underrated. Kind of like Josh mentioned, how there's some question about how much of an epic Spenser intended in his work. And I think the same criticism has been lodged against Tennyson. The Idylls are kind of separate poems that are put together. They tell a story, but they're not all like, it's not, there's not like a story that unfolds throughout. They all focus on different characters and so on. So there's a question about how unified the whole thing is. But I think that and just like Spencer and the Fairy Queen, Tennyson was looking at his society and all the issues that English people were dealing. He spent his whole life planning to write this poem. I mean, thinking about writing about King Arthur. And when he finally sat down to do it, he's in his 40s or 50s. He was already well established. He was the poet laureate of Victorian England, and he's thinking about his society, which is suddenly dealing with its own immigration and refugee questions, not just the Irish and Scots and things like that, but Jews from Europe, fleeing repression there. What do we do with them? All of these questions are being debated in Parliament and by Tennyson's fellow authors. So in the Idylls of the King, I think he's trying to put together the statement about what Victorian England is supposed to be, and he sees a model for that in Camelot, in Arthur's kingdom. So the response to refugees and things like that isn't a huge part of the Idylls, but I think there's enough incidents there, enough emphasis there to write. It's an admittedly short paper, but I think the point is definitely that Tennyson would agree with Kirk and many other traditional conservatives that when it comes to matters like that, to questions about refugees and people who need help, it's better to trust in the individual virtue of our great men and women and our men and women who want to be great than it is to create these massive governmental bureaucracies to handle these problems, because those bureaucracies are just going to mess everything up as we see. So in the Idylls, you see, like the point I make is that Arthur, I mean, he assumes personal responsibility for people who come to him asking for help. And this is, of course, going back to the Middle Ages and the sanctuary traditions that developed there, or even back to ancient Greece, if you go back far enough. But the point is, again, that individual virtue, like our leaders, the wealthy, the powerful, the educated, they are the ones who have the responsibility to care for those who are less fortunate. And that putting your faith in government to solve problems like that is just going to make things worse. So I think
what specifically in Idylls can you bring to connect it with that idea of the haven?
Well, Camelot itself is, and this is a central part of the Arthurian legends. But Camelot itself is a haven, right? So in the first book of the Idylls is about Arthur founding his kingdom. And how does he do that? He first has to clear it of all of these. And if you read Mallory is kind of the same. Like, what exists before Camelot comes into being? It's this wasteland filled with brigands, and in Mallory's case, giants and dragons. Actually, I think Tennyson might mention them too in passing. But all these horrible creatures and men and women that are terrorizing the land. And Arthur comes along, and he's got this clear vision, this vision of a Christian kingdom that can bring order to the realm. And so he establishes his kingdom there. And one of the things I noted in my paper is even, Camelot becomes, for however long it lasts, it's this place where people can get help when they need it. It's also a place that puts people on their best behavior. Even the wicked who go there, they tend to avoid causing mischief there. There's just this ennobling idea represented by the city. And I think that's what Tennyson is getting at, too, in his version of Camelot. Is like England can be this place in Europe. It can be a Christian kingdom that imposes order on uncivilized parts of the world, right? This is the height of England's colonial enterprise. And for Tennyson, it's not necessarily such a bad thing, because there are people around the world who need to be enlightened, who need to be saved from the forces of disorder and so on.
Okay, great. Josh, do you have anything to add to the idea of haven, anything in Fairy Queen that you can connect with this?
I was trying to think about that when I saw that Camilla and I were paired together in this. I don't know that there's anything as specific as Camelot in Fairy Queen, because part of what Spencer does, and this is one of the places where people who want to say that it's less complete than it could be will point to. Arthur is still a prince in the Fairy Queen, and he is on a quest to find Gloriana, who is the literal Fairy Queen, and she is the allegorical representation of Queen Elizabeth I. And in as much as Spencer completed, Arthur does not complete his quest. So the Fairy Queen is all before he would have then gone back to England and would have established his kingdom. The closest that we get, I don't even. This at least fits thematically with what Camilla was saying. There's not a political place of like safety, and I mean in Fairy Queen there are always monsters around, and there are always strong people, warriors who can fight off monsters. But it is the presence of virtue that enables the knight to triumph over the monster. So if there's some hope for the refugee, it's that the hope for the refugee is not removing the danger, but it is the fact that the presence of righteousness is as common as the presence of wickedness. So that whenever you have a monster, like I'm thinking of, I think I'm remembering the details right. It's been over a year since I've read this, so anyone who's listening, if I mix up names, I apologize. I think there's one scene where there's a monster, Orgoglio, who is a symbol of pride. I think he's a giant. And Arthur comes along, and he has just exemplified some form of humility. So Arthur like beats the giant and trips him, and the giant falls. And it's a picture of the humility triumphing over pride. And in that sense, character, virtue, righteousness, justice, all of that is its own way of creating a response to wickedness in the world. But it doesn't function the same way as a stable city and a temporary haven, kind of like Camelot does.
Yeah, very interesting. And I wonder too, Josh, if you think that maybe the backgrounds of the respective poets, I mean, Tennyson is this lauded, wealthy poet laureate of a stable English kingdom. And as you know, Spencer was bitter from the way that he'd been treated. He had all these ideals that didn't come into play. I wonder if that's reflective too. And
it's certainly possible. It also, the surrounding historical context is probably relevant. That, I mean, Spencer is, I mean, the preceding 20 years before Spencer is writing about Elizabeth are all this chaotic. You don't really know if it's Bloody Mary or if it's James or it's Edward or who's going to be king, and as opposed to if I remember right, I mean, Tennyson's writing under Victoria, and it's very stable, and the British Empire it keeps expanding, and it has that effect that you're describing.
Yeah, right.
Great.
Wonderful.
All right, we have a couple minutes left. Danny, that's my cat.
My cat wandered over to sitting on the table. You can't see her, but she's here. We've all got cats. So that's fantastic.
They all want to YouTube together. So any projects coming up that you're working on? Either of you, both of you?
I'll mention two. I'm hoping to publish the dissertation after a successful defense, and I'm also working on finishing a 10th grade history textbook that covers Roman history through medieval Europe. So I would love to finish that this summer, and then I'll be publishing that through Thales Press. So that will eventually be available through the Thales Press Amazon page if anybody wants to check that out.
Excellent.
What was the subject of your dissertation, Josh? Can you mention it?
Lewis and gender. So this is
right.
I can say a lot more, but I know we're coming up on time. Yeah.
Right.
And Camilla, do you have any?
I'm presenting next month. Yes, I'm presenting next month at the online summer seminar that is being put together by Mythlore. I'm talking about Charles Williams, Russell Kirk, and Stephen King, their respective depictions of hell, which actually there's a lot of overlap despite each of these figures representing a different faith tradition. They characterize it in surprisingly similar terms. So
this sounds like a Peter Kraft book that he comes up with the three debating from totally different angles about the same thing. That'll be an interesting book.
Sure.
Fantastic.
Which Russell Kirk books did you work with for that?
Well, for that one, I'm actually using Kirk's eschatology, which you know a lot about, as a framework for analyzing Williams's and King's, because Kirk is always good at explaining exactly what he's trying to do, you know, in his stories, and Williams is not. Like, Williams can be really confusing. As you guys both know. King is not as confusing, but I think that Kirk gives us some nice tools for analyzing timeless moments, you know, how they work and so on.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Well, this has been an absolute delight to hear you both talk about your papers. I'm thrilled that your academic work has been added to the journal, and it makes for a great read and reread. It's kind of like reading Dante. I got to read it once, skim it, and then go back in and take in the footnotes and go off on my rabbit trails, reading all the footnotes and referring to, because I know Zach brings up Kirk all the time. And I really need to read more about Russell, or read more written by Russell Kirk. So, look at that. The third cat in the triad. Looks like a wise, wise cat. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for participating.
It's been thanks, Annie. Appreciate all your work editing. You make those things great.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
And good luck with all your upcoming dissertations and presentations.
Good luck, Josh.
All right. Thank you, sir. And same to you.
All right.
See you next time,
everybody.
Thanks, guys. We're back.
We're back. Hey, y'all. Welcome back. We are moving into I think like the final third of our super fun day, talking about King Arthur Legendarium, an unexpected journal. So I've done the first several segments, and they have been amazing. So if you've been here the whole time, that's awesome. If you just got here, we still have great stuff coming. So don't leave. Don't go away.
And still have more giveaways. So
yes,
hashtag Camelot.
Hashtag Camelot, y'all. Yes,
yep.
Awesome.
Hashtag Camelot.
It's right down on there. So if you're like, how do I spell Camelot? It's right there. Hashtag Camelot. You can get it, and you could be the winner. It'd just be so fun and exciting to come away from this with your own copy of King Arthur Legendarium. You can read all the great articles we've been talking today. That's my dad. That's my dad. Hi, Dad. My dad entering. Go
Yay!
Yay! All right, that is awesome.
There's Ted.
That's Ted, right? That's my fiance. That's my amazing fiance. I know. He also writes for an unexpected journal. Y'all are going to be like, why am I watching this? But seriously, you know I'm all.
Yes.
Okay.
And I saw Denise, my friend Denise, was in here as well. So yay! It's so exciting.
Y'all, this is going to be a hot spin to see who wins this thing. So it's going to be super fun to see who gets this one.
I did not, just because I got so wrapped up in Josh and Camilla's talks about their papers, I was supposed to read The Myth of Arthur during that segment, and I didn't want to interrupt what was going, but I'm going to take 2 minutes and I'm going to read. He included, I felt like I wanted one of the greats to have included into this, and G.K. Chesterton wrote a poem called The Myth of Arthur. So this goes out to all of the Chesterton lovers and all the poetry lovers.
Yes.
There it is. So I will read The Myth of Arthur. This was like the opening scene to our book this time.
I love it.
O learned man who never learned to learn, save to deduce by timid steps and small, from towering smoke that fire can never burn, and from tall tales that men were never tall. Say, have you thought what manner of man it is, of whom men say he could strike giants down, are what strong memories over time's abyss bore up the pomp of Camelot and the crown, and why one banner all the background fills beyond the pageants of so many spears, and by what witchery in the western hills a throne stands empty for 1,000 years.
Hmm.
Who hold unheeding this immense impact, immortal story for immortal sin, lest human fable touch historic fact, chase myths like moths and fight them with a pin. Take comfort, rest, there needs not this ado. You shall not be a myth, I promise you.
Hmm.
Something so beautiful.
Ah, I love that.
And what I appreciate, it's kind of a combination of the really beautiful things about Arthur, the virtue, and all the things that I've talked about before. But then what Junius brought in, there's another side to it that we also need to be aware of, that not all was golden in those days. There was still fallen men. And I love Chesterton's poem because it's a revelation of both of those, to not look upon Arthur as perfection, but to see him as noble, but also to see him as a man. And that we will always remember him. And we still think of Arthur. You can't say King Arthur without thinking of, it takes you right to that time, that place, the knights, and all the qualities, the medieval virtues and writing. And Denise Armstrong is asking, what was that metric pattern? Oh, learned man who, do you remember our creative writing class at HCU, Therese?
I'm sorry. It was like cutting up for just a second.
Oh, did you have creative writing?
I did with Dr. Ordway.
Yes, with Dr. Ordway. So we need her here to say, what pattern is it? So I'm counting it on my fingers.
In my head right now. I should know this, but
I should know it too. I have it in a book. I could look it up and get back to you. So
that's right. We do not know, but we will find out.
We will find out.
We'll find out, Denise. Don't worry. Don't worry. Well, one of us can Google it while the other.
It's a pop quiz. What rhyme scheme is the myth of Arthur?
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
sonnet. That's longer than a sonnet.
Yeah, I don't.
No, it's a sonnet. It's a sonnet because I see that's A B A B C D C D E F E F.
We're gonna find out.
Yep. 1,
Andy's
2,
passing the code for you.
3. It's a sonnet.
All right, Andy says sonnet. I'm going with it. Sounds awesome. I don't have it in front of me.
It's a sonnet. I dare say Shakespearean sonnet, not Spenserian sonnet. And hopefully our dear friend and professor will not rise up and send me an email saying, I can't believe you stated that was Shakespearean.
Well, if she does, then we'll put a correction out. We'll say that we're learning.
we're learning, but going from here, I'm looking at the rhyme scheme because A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. I'm doing that, and I get to the bottom, and then I can do the bouncing on my fingers, the 10 syllables.
Yep, count.
So,
while we're
anyhow.
counting, don't forget to enter. It's down there on the tape. #Camelot to win an issue,
which has full of poetry and one of the new rhyme schemes that I was never aware of until Carice, you wrote it. And
we will talk about that. I'm so excited. It was really fun to find. I know. Yeah.
I can't wait to talk about it.
I just totally nerd out about that.
I love nerding out about things like that.
It's the best, right? And the great thing is, if you're the kind of person that nerds out about stuff like this and like that, this is the journal for you. So you have found your people. This is your place. Like, if you like to write about that kind of stuff, look at our submissions page and send something in. You never know. You might be on the next launch party. Yeah.
We are your fellowship. If this is what your passion is, we are your fellowship. Please We would love to see what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Hashtag Camelot. Are we going to
Is it time?
spin to win? I'm looking at the clock. I think we have about 5 minutes left to go. The next segment coming up is Arthur and Renewal.
Yes, with Seth Meyer.
Yes, Reese will be covering that one. Cannot wait to hear T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, the pairing of that. And that's going to be a great.
Yes, it's fantastic. And then he wrote some other articles too. So we're going to try to, hopefully we have time to pull in a little bit from those.
Yep.
And we can talk about those also. So
yes, yeah. Excellent.
All right, Carla, is it time to spin? Are you telling us it's time? Should we spin?
Spin to win, Carla?
Spin it to win it? We don't know.
All right. Uh-oh.
Here it goes. Oh, my goodness. So many people I love in this one.
Whoop, that was the old one.
That was last time. Sorry, Charlotte, you can't win again. You already won. Look at that. Ooh, and my mom was in there too. Ted Wright is the winner! Yay! Ah. That's not. I promise it's not rigged. It's a random spinner.
Yes, yes, it is.
I'm not spinning, so I'm just telling you.
Ted Wright has also contributed to
yes, he's amazing.
Unexpected Journals and fantastic archaeological scholarship. Really amazing things that you can find in our archives. Go back to our archives, look up past issues, look up Ted.
Him on epic archaeology. So yeah. Yep. We have all kinds of people who write for this journal. We have fabulous archaeologists, we have professors, we have teachers, we have pastors. So if you want to be in this fellowship, come on, don't hesitate. Check it out and join us.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really an honor to work with so many different types of literary scholarship, but the ability to write fiction, really good fiction, poetry. And I think that what we have to offer to students, high school students, and libraries, dip your toes into what apologetics is. You can go to our website. There is a clear examination of what apologetics is. If it's something that you're kind of unclear about, go to the website, and there's a great essay posted there and a short description. And we invite, I think this would also be really helpful material for small groups and for youth groups at church. I think
yes, absolutely.
Some of these ideas.
Yes, absolutely.
Classic literature. You can read the essays, but you take a chance, pick up that copy of Spencer, of Fairy Queen, in no time like the summer to read something challenging and fun, and I think it'll be great. So.
And then you have articles of people who can read it with you as you read the articles to help you understand what's happening. I just saw Carla pop up a reminder that if you haven't already won in the next giveaway, I think this is right. Is that going to pop back up again maybe? That you can win, I don't want to say this wrong, but I think it's right. I think you can win a free year subscription to an Unexpected Journal. So the whole year. Yes, look at that. Y'all, don't miss it. So if you didn't win the last couple of times, you do not want to miss this. So in our next little intermission or our next, wherever it is, break, pause thing, this is what you could win. So if you're super sad right now because you didn't win last time, get happy because look at what you have a chance to win this time.
Our full year subscription. That's 4 issues of journals. Yes. Yeah, and we've had quite a year, and we have some two great issues still coming up.
Yeah,
it's going
to be amazing. All right, well, I think it is actually time. I'm looking at my schedule.
I think so.
Yeah, it's time for the next session. Our next segment is Arthur and Renewal with Seth Meyer. So we'll see you there.
All right, excellent. See you there.
King Arthur launch party for an Unexpected Journal King Arthur Legendarium issue. This is segment number 5, Arthur and Renewal, with me, your host, Carice Gilliland, and Seth Meyer. So Seth, will you introduce yourself to our listeners and our watchers? Tell us a little bit about you, and then tell us about your pieces. You have more than one thing in this issue.
Sure, yeah. I suffered through lots of the, a dozen courses at HBU, along with Carice and pretty much
Yes.
everybody else. I mean, it was an enjoyable suffering, but it was a lot of work. So
I loved it.
it was very rewarding, yeah. And I'm really not an Arthurian expert. You probably could tell if you read my articles, but I was in another program and they did a seminar on Arthur, and I thought, well, for some reason I took it just because I didn't know anything about it, and so I just kind of used some of my essays in that course for this. But I got to learn a lot, so I just try to share what I've learned. Unlike Carice and a lot of these people, I'm not like a literature person originally. I'm an engineer, so when I can learn a new fact about something, that's exciting for me. And then we just go from there. So yeah. I've always been kind of a T.S. Eliot. I always sort of liked him for some reason. I don't know. He won a Nobel Prize, so I'm not the only person. And they had in the course there were a lot of like Arthurian themes in modern day literature. I mean, you see it in the other articles, especially like the C.S. Lewis Space Trilogy. Arthur shows up, but it actually showed up in some of his work. So that was kind of the main piece I'd be interested to discuss.
Yeah, so interesting. Like, I loved that you brought T.S. Eliot into that conversation. I don't think that's something people think about. Yeah, Carla says she's pretty sure you coordinated your background.
I'm not sure if you're up to this. I'm pretty sure that Annie could tell us more about the Lady of Shalott picture that I found at Hobby Lobby one time. So
I like it. We'll get Annie to tell us more on one of the breaks about it. So I'll try to remember to ask her, or you can like chat in and we'll figure out, she can tell us more about it. But that is awesome. I love that it totally matches up.
There's another one there, but I couldn't quite fit them both on the wall. So
yep. Annie, yeah. Okay, Annie, you got to fill us in. Like, maybe you can chime in and help us out. Yeah, I love that we actually have people at HBU or HCU from all different backgrounds, in our program. And then we've kind of continued that little tradition here at the Journal. So we have contributors. We were just talking, archaeologists, engineers, teachers, pastors, all kinds of people. I think it makes for a really interesting issue. Now, for you created or saw these connections between T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and King Arthur. So first, can you tell us kind of how did you come to that idea of those two things being connected?
Sure. I just listened to my professors closely, and it was their idea. There's some things that show up, like there's the Fisher King. Mm-hmm. I mean, what Robin Williams was in a movie called The Fisher King, and the idea is he's suffering some wound, and the land suffers along with him while he's waiting for renewal. And the Mort de Arthur and all the Grail literature, which actually is from like several different people wrote it right over the years, and so he's waiting around for them to discover the Holy Grail, because then he can drink of it and be healed, and then the land will renew. I mean, it's a little bit like I remember C.S. Lewis talking about the ancient fertility gods, like what was Osiris, the Egyptian guy that when he died and came back to life, creation came back with him. And I mean, that's sort of what Jesus did, right, in a way, conquering death. So so the theme of new life has been around as long as we have been, I guess.
So in Eliot's The Wasteland, I was looking at your article, and you do start out talking about like the actual land and nature.
All right, April is the coolest month, right?
Yes, right.
Opening line.
It's not an upper,
Yeah.
But geographically, you kind of unpack that. You talk in your article about that. Why was that an important thing to talk about in terms of Arthur? Like, how are those things coming together?
Okay. I do recall. I just kind of, I write these things and then I just totally forget about them until about a half hour before we go on.
That's okay.
I was rereading it like you were, and I mean, in the there was somebody. There was a James Fraser and another lady author, Jessie Weston, that had written a lot about like the mythology that went into the Arthurian legend. And let's see, Jessie Weston's from Ritual to Romance, and even in the little notes at the end of the Wasteland, T.S. Eliot says, "Oh yeah, this really influenced it a lot," and so there's a lot of, I mean, probably I'd just say secular thought that went into, life. Where does life come from? I mean, that's all. Philosophers and literature people have always been, you come up with a fertility god or some way to explain it. So that's always been around, and when Eliot wrote it, I mean, the tone of the Wasteland, you can't really discuss it, or I've never heard it discussed without people talking about, what a shock World War I was to everyone. The century of peace in the 19th century, the Victorians and all this progress and no major wars. You just forget about Napoleon, I guess. And
he's like a side.
That's been 100 years, right? So that's been like 100 years. And so it was just a shock. And so they just say Europe was kind of spiritually deflated. I mean, it was a pretty bloody war, right? Trench warfare and everything. So, I mean, that's kind of why Eliot's kind of drawing on all the depressing imagery. And he's kind of trying to find, how do we get started again, I think is.
Yeah, and he is talking about all that destruction. And one of the interesting ideas that I think you were talking about was kind of like hope in the midst of all of that. Like hope in the midst of decay, hope in the midst of destruction, sort of that like regeneration idea, right? And I think that you said like the Arthurian legend, though written 8 centuries prior to Eliot's poem, serves as a guide to search for hope amidst the moral decay of Eliot's day and our own. So let's say somebody's like reading that and they are kind of in a personal wasteland or even like a extrinsic wasteland. How does reading Arthur, like you're asserting that reading it would give you some hope among today's moral decay? So talk about that for us.
So I mean, there's a lot of the the religious sense in there. I mean, even T.S. Eliot really hadn't come to faith at this point when he wrote The Wasteland. You can see he's kind of searching around himself. I mean, at the end, he quotes some fire sermon from Buddha and some Hindu chant, and he references Augustine and burning desires and everything. So he's kind of searching himself as well. I mean, when the imagery of the searching for roots that grow. I mean, he kind of makes allusions to scripture about the Son of Man. He's from the root of Jesse or something like that. Jesus and so he's searching around too. Here, how can like in the Arthur legend actually? I mean, it had a lot of very Christian mythology built into it because, like the Fisher King, his wound is kind of the wound from sin because what he gets wounded with is the spear that pierced Christ's side, and so they call it the dolorous blow or something like that. And so it's kind of like he's staggering around from sin. And I mean, after 9/11, I remember seeing somebody talk about how much of a drag on the economy is the threat of is sin. I mean, terrorism. You go to the airport, how many people are employed checking your tennis shoes and everything else for bombs? And so, I mean, it's it's always with us,
Right, the effects of it.
Yeah,
the fallen nature. So if a person if a person were going to, you know, in our segment with Stephen Bedard, we were talking about like a messy apologetic. But let's say a person was going to use King Arthur's stories like apologetically alongside Wasteland. Like how would that work? Because I think
Okay.
that's some of kind of what you're saying. Like,
Right. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's kind of near the end of it. There's, it's the like we've all seen the Indiana Jones where he's trying to find the Holy Grail, right? And
yeah,
there's the fantabulous one, and then there's the wooden one that probably needed to get thrown out, and they picked that one. So he's kind of got that same thing going on in here. At the end, he talks about I mean, in the Arthur legend, they're running around trying to find the Grail, and it's kind of like this desolate little overlooked church, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the imagery. Eliot puts that in the Wasteland. He talks about, a church, the wind's blowing, flapping the doors open, and no one's around. And so it's a little bit of, the solution's not always obvious, I guess.
Mhm.
I mean, God works in secret ways, I guess, or not obvious ways. So, I mean, that could be one angle of it. I mean, as they were, I mean, a lot. I mean, who is it that is worthy enough to find the Grail? Is it Lancelot? This is bad. Maybe not Galahad and Lancelot.
Galahad, I think.
Galahad. Okay, and he's the one. I mean, there's a Tennyson version of it, and he was more of a Victorian, and so he made it a little more Christianized, I think. But where he's just says, he's got the humility of Christ, and so he's the only one that's really worthy to find the Grail. And so I mean, we go through the same journey. I mean, I was just in a group last night, Bible study with Chinese people, and the guy leading it was saying how, people would ask, well, why doesn't God answer my prayer? And he's like, you just got to wait on God, and you got to realize, he's got your back, he's got it. And, it's not, I mean, you keep up with your end of the effort, but you've just got to kind of rest in God and realize that, that's where everything comes from. So that's where our solutions will come from.
And maybe, like, I was just thinking about this, maybe in, Arthur, there is this ongoing idea that there's going to be a return of this king, right? The goodness that was Arthur is not totally left the earth, right? There's this like coming back idea of like, we're not just left here. Eliot, when he's saying, April is the coolest month and there's these things going on, and it's just like, I'm alone, and there's no hope really. But the Arthur stories, I feel like are full of hope, thematically. And then the fact that he's eventually there's like this whole idea of a return is very fascinating in terms of, Christology. If you think about Christological imagery and the ideas apologetically of that. So I think like regeneration, renewal is definitely a theme in Arthur. I think you're completely right in your article. One of the other things, like, in your essay, it's kind of exploring, this is one of the discussion questions for our session, but it explores the way that Eliot's regeneration of faith. So, right, you were saying like when he wrote Wasteland, he hadn't come to the faith, but you could tell, he's digging around, he's looking. You can sort of see that really almost follow it through the poem, right? Like, it's really surprising. And then you said you explore kind of how his regeneration of faith has an impact on his outlook and his work, because you talk about later when he does come to faith. How do we see that in Eliot? Like, will you talk us through that in case somebody doesn't know anything about T.S. Eliot? Kind of explain, yeah.
In his, I think he started off to get a philosophy doctorate, and then he studied Hinduism for like a couple years, and then he did all the work, and then he said, I don't really want to teach, so he didn't. I think he even wrote a dissertation, but he didn't defend it. So he's kind of an interesting character, and then decided people read poetry. Well, back then people read poetry, so he figured that was like being a music star, probably. I mean, so he had, yeah. So he I mean, he does come to faith, and he sort of shocked the literary establishment. People were all, disappointed. Virginia Woolf and that crowd. But so I like his four quartets is. I mean, he wrote an Ash Wednesday, and I don't recall that much of it. I got a little bit of it there in the article where I think he's found, the Christian faith by then, and then in four quartets he's he's very Christian when he's writing that. He's kind of found his purpose. What's his line? In your beginning, in the end is your beginning, or something.
Yeah.
He plays around with that, and yeah. So I've just been mowing the lawn here, and
no, that's great. I think that's super helpful, because there are people who don't know his journey, and they don't, maybe they've read Wasteland, but they didn't know anything else about him. Because sometimes you learn things in isolation. So I think that's super helpful.
Right.
If you want to, I also wanted to talk about, you have another article where you're talking about Sir Gawain and virtue, and I'm going to find the title of it.
Oh, right. Sure.
Yeah. And I was like, let's unpack that a little bit, because I think that's so interesting. Medieval virtue, Arthur and Sir Gawain, and men and women. And I thought that was, super interesting. Yeah. So can you talk about that? Like, let's say somebody read the Wasteland article, and then what is this one about? What is this article about?
This is, it kind of came from, actually, I've got a book here. We went through a lot of Romance of Arthur, more Arthurian stories. And so there was one, they were called a robe saga or something. That people would try on. Actually, the famous one was someone came to, maybe it's Percival, somebody came to town, and they had this magic robe, and it was so beautiful, and all the women wanted to wear it. But the problem was it would kind of reveal some of their infidelities and their sins.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, but then there was, I'm trying to remember, there was a couple of different lines of stories that went into that. So actually I should take on the men first. Okay. Yeah, I jumped to the wrong side there to begin with, but there's another line of stories, which it's actually, I think it came out about the same time or within the same century as some Chaucer stories.
Okay.
And there's one where the knight has committed some sort of sin or something, and it's the wife of Bass Tale. You're probably kind of familiar with that, right?
I don't know. I mean, it's been a while.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I think he's given this commission. He has like a year to find out what it is that women desire, what they want most. And so he's given that challenge, and he finally gets to the point where he meets a woman, and it's like Shrek, where she's beautiful during the day, and then and an ogre at night. And so he's got to decide, I think he's vowed to marry her. But that's part of the I wouldn't say bet or whatever, but part of the wager. Okay. And so she gives him the choice, do you want me to look beautiful during the day or at night, with all the implications? And so he turns it around and says, well, I'll give you the choice. You can decide. And then since he gave up and yielded to her desires, then she turns into a full princess, like the curse is gone. So that was kind of like, in The Wife of Bass Tale, it's really something that like Virginia Woolf would really pick up on, because she makes some very strong statements about men and women that maybe a little strong, but it's trying to balance things out, because you think the medieval era, all the women were submissive and the men told everyone what to do, and so that kind of balance that out, countered that a little bit. And so that was one line of stories. But then there was another line where the women were the ones that were at fault, and then and so that's kind of a little bit of the interplay of those stories. They're not like your classic, Merlin and the sword and the stone Arthurian stories, but they had a lot of the gender tension and stuff like that. So,
and then you talked specifically about like Sir Gawain's humility, and can you talk about like him as a character and that quality of humility? Why would that be important for us apologetically? Like, how could we talk about that?
Right. I mean, in my mind, I just go back to the Grail legend, where the person who was humble was the one that was worthy to find the Grail. With Gawain, the book is better than the movie, I would say, right? Because the movie that came out was a little odd. So I'm a little bit freezing up on that question because I have not got to review the.
It's all right. I was just looking at your article, and it was really interesting because you're talking about. I just have it pulled up right here. So you're talking about how he has this humility that's very Christ-like. And I was like, I really love that idea. I love the idea of thinking about him, in a Christian, Christ-like humility. And then you were saying, ultimately, I think at the end or something, he just demonstrates and displays that. I think it goes back to something Junius was talking about in an earlier segment, where he was saying, the display of Christian characteristics were the highest, were the true knights. They were the true, you had the ideas of courtly love, where it was like, get the women, basically. But then you have these higher ideals that were like true Christian ideals. And I thought that was really interesting that you also kind of talked about that, but really specifically in that character. So I thought it was really fascinating, interesting.
Right. I remember he ends up with the sash at the end. It's sort of got this saying on it. What's it? Shame to him who thinks evil. I don't remember exactly how that fits in here, but actually, part of it. Let's see here. I don't know. Part of it, he talks about Christ's humility wearing the crown of thorns, and that's what brings us to bliss. And so, I mean, Christ, Christ was humbled. So, yeah.
I mean, it even comes back in a robe and in some kind of a garment. Like it's kind of the idea. It's like robes of righteousness. It's kind of a fascinating thought to think about, kind of putting that together, since he has something to wear at the end that kind of points to that humility.
Okay.
Oh gosh, we are close, not totally at time, but super close to time. Do you want to tell us like where we can find you and where your work is, and what you're working on next?
Sure. I mean, I do end up, when I find an issue that I really like, I end up putting a lot of time into these articles. So you can find me there. I'm technically still working on a dissertation, kind of world religions. I mean, that's kind of like how the Wasteland kind of interested me, because he's comparing, like Augustine is dealing with, burning desires. How do I handle them? And then Buddha's doing the same thing, and TSL is kind of balancing between them and comparing the two. So I enjoy doing stuff with world religions because I volunteer with like international students. So this is so come to one of our Chinese Bible studies in Ohio. Find me there or online, and just in these issues mostly.
Yeah, and it says, I think you have a website, Narnia and Frodo. It's like running it at the bottom, the ticker tape.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. I just converted a lot of the course papers from our HBU apologetics program and put them there.
Oh, nice.
Put some dissertation papers or dissertation program stuff there. But yeah, just
Awesome.
Just
So look
slow.
looks at that there and look him up in the past issues, and you can find his work there. Tell us about your PhD a little bit though, like how you came to that and what kind of classes you've been working on. Like I think that's interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'd seen Zach and a couple other people from our program got done at HBU and thought, oh, I have more time on my hands, so this is what I'll do. And I thought it would be, for some reason, that appealed to me. But I've kind of tried to, I enjoy kind of the literature and the philosophy and the history and culture, but I'm trying to kind of apply it towards like world religions and how to relate the gospel to people from other cultures. But the gospel.
And what led you to that specifically? Like,
I've just always, I've always kind of volunteered with like international guys, and they tend to be from like China and India and the Middle East and Japan. So that, I mean, I used to I've listened to different preachers, and the ones that were really moving, they would use poetry and they use a lot of literature and stuff like that. It's not all apologetics, like, I'm trying to prove something, but you're trying to open up the people's heart and say, well,
yes,
if you go this direction, you get everything you've got and a little bit more, you get the whole story. So that's sort of the angle of what I'm trying to do.
That's great. Yeah, fantastic. And I love that. I love that you kept going. And just a shout out to all the students out there who are working on things like your papers and your projects. I don't know if you paid attention to how many times Seth said, I was working on this in school. I was reading this in school. I was working on this for a paper. Like, that's so important to take that work and put it out into the public sphere. And I love that you're doing that, and that you contributed so much to this issue is awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure. It was fun. You write all these papers, and then nobody but the professor reads them. So it's fun to be.
Well, it's a lot of work.
Stuff,
yeah.
right.
And that's how we got to this journal, because we were like, what can we do with all this work we've just done
That's
and nobody else is doing?
Torture the popular audience. That's right.
That's right. So we might have to tweak it a little bit, like, don't turn it in with the cover page, but we'll take it. It'll be awesome, and really exciting to see those big ideas. And I can't wait to see what you actually, like, when you get your dissertation all finished and defended. It's going to be awesome. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. It's been awesome to talk to you, and super excited to see.
You've been a wonderful host. Thank you very much.
Thanks. It's been super fun.
Okay.
Oh, maybe we have like 30 seconds. I don't know.
Hi.
See?
Well, I love it. Hi, Chris. Hi.
I love it. They were like, Virginia's going to be on. I was like, yes.
I know. Virginia's here. I have set the tone by wearing my Renaissance garb.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
I literally had this sitting in my bookshelf.
Oh, that's the best.
We are joking about nerding out on things. That's what we do, right?
Oh, yeah. I just love it.
Of all the strange things. So I have the absolute honor and privilege of talking to you both now. I'm so excited. This makes my year, because all of the creative energy, all of the maker's gifts, all of it all culminates right here with you two. So I am so excited to talk to you guys. So this
section is called Arthur and Inspiration. And Carice wrote a wonderful poem that is oddly specific, of which I am not familiar with, which you sometimes do with some of your poetic submissions to the journal. They are forms that I have never heard of, that are absolutely so intricate and beautifully woven together. And then Virginia is the cover mastermind
Yes.
to a vast majority of the covers for Unexpected Journal. So Virginia has designed this. I was so excited to ask her to run with this idea because the one of the prior cover designs, which cover was it, Virginia, that you designed that was also like this?
Oh, the medieval one. I love the medieval one.
Yes.
That's my favorite. That's one of my favorites.
Yes.
Actually, I would tear the cover off and just frame it because it's so beautiful.
Yes, we said the same thing. It should be like posters or stickers or something like you can put on your cups. Like, it's just so cool.
Yeah. So you illustrated the cover for this one, Virginia. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first of all, I want to give the floor to you both. Virginia, tell us a little bit about yourself, your connection to AUJ and what you do, and if you have some fabulous things coming up.
Okay. Okay. I'm Virginia. I'm from Chile, and I studied a Master of Arts in Apologetics in Houston for 3 years. Oh, I'm a medical doctor. I work in infectious diseases here in Chile, and I teach at a medical school. But I discovered my love for drawing while I was studying apologetics at HBU, and also my love for the medieval things because of Dr. Ordway, our professor, who is amazing, and encouraged me to draw. So what I do basically right now is I work at a hospital, and then I work at medical school, and when I have the time I draw, which I love, and I love to read, and and all sorts of crazy stuff that I never know what I'm going to come up with. I just never know, and if I'm unsupervised, I just don't know. but yeah, so that's what I basically do.
Excellent. Yes, and you're also a huge fan of G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, yes. I'm crazy about G.K. Chesterton. I go to the Chesterton conference every single year. And if you can ever go, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it because I think there's nothing more joyful than to do that. And yeah, it's my mothership. I feel normal for 3 whole days.
What would Chesterton say about that?
He would say yes.
Oh, yes. Joyful. And Carice, I hope one day you can make it. This year is in Minneapolis, and I'm counting the days.
It's in Minneapolis?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
My practically hometown.
It's like your.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay.
All right. I will bring my Viking garb as I re-enter Minnesota, and I will hopefully join you. That's exciting.
I hope
Excellent.
so. That Annie and me have not been able to meet, and we say because it would be too much for people to bear, but I think the time is coming.
No, they need it. They need that. The world needs it.
Kind of rattled the decorum of the whole thing.
That's right. Just bust in and be like, guys, we're here.
Have never been able to be together in person, but we were classmates.
Oh, God has his purposes, I'm sure. And Carice, what are you working on? What are you doing? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I'm Carice Gilliland. I recently got engaged, which is super exciting. I don't know when I'm getting married yet, but I'm sure that's going to happen. And let's see. Oh, I teach 3rd grade, so I also work in infectious diseases, just a different way.
In a more exciting way.
In a way less sanitary way, probably. No, they're amazing. I love my little 3rd graders. They're so special and wonderful. And I teach at a classical Christian school in Fort Worth. So I get to teach about Greco-Roman history, which is like my favorite, and great literature. And it's amazing and wonderful, and poetry and grammar and all that jazz. I was one of the very first people in the HBU program. So it was me and Kate, and I forget who else in the very first class. And then one of the like founding members of Unexpected Journal. So it's super fun. It's like watching a kid grow up, kind of. You know, it was just a baby idea, and then now it's this awesome journal that we get to do all this fun stuff with. So that's amazing. Yeah, I contributed a poem to this issue, which we'll talk more about later. But yeah, I'd like to find a form that goes with the theme and then see if I can do something with that for fun. So that's like my nerding out stuff. And I also love G.K. Chesterton. So we can talk about that all day. Actually, I wanted to show you. So I have found this rock one time, and I thought it kind of looked like Chesterton's head. So I painted him like a little G.K. Chesterton. And he's a paperweight on my desk. He's my little GKC. But what I put, yeah, GKC, and then Chesterton. He's my little GKC paperweight that I keep on my desk at school. I'm at school because my air conditioner's broken, and if you're keeping it at my house, if you're keeping up with Texas, it's quite hot. So I'm up in my classroom, hanging out,
Enjoying the air conditioning.
enjoying the air conditioning tremendously. Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm gonna, since you mentioned your poems and you contribute poetry quite often, and it's always very specialized. Tell us how you heard about this triolet French medieval form. How did you even come across this?
Sure. So we were doing King Arthur, and I was like, well, I want to write in a form that would have been a form that would have been in which they would have been writing in those times, because I wanted the flavor of it. You know, it's kind of like you were talking earlier, Annie, about vocabulary and flavor, and like I wanted to experience what it'd be like to put that form together. So I believe it's called a triolet, because it's a French medieval form.
It would be triolet, not triolet, right? Because it's French.
I think so.
Yes.
Got, you know, the little thing where you can Google the like, how do you say this word? I did just to see, and that's what they said. So I'm going with that.
That's
yeah.
good.
So I think it's triolet because it has the 3 repeated lines in it. It's a really interesting form. It's the way I found it was looking up forms for this issue. So I was like, I'm going to find a form. And I was reading Mallory. I was like, I want to use his version of things. And I came across that phrase, nourished brother. And I was like, that's so interesting. Like, gosh, what an interesting phrase. Like, and it just kind of all started. And I was thinking about the sword and the stone. I was like, that's a very approachable Arthurian image that everyone knows about. And then it can combine with this idea. But that form is really fascinating. It has it's deceptively simple because it has repetition in it. So you have to repeat the exact line, but you have to make the meaning change with that exact line in a particular order. And there are 3 of those exact lines. So they have to be in the right order. You can't change the order of the words. You can change it with capitalization, punctuation, connotation, and possibly denotation. That'd be really hard. It doesn't really work in English, but that's the challenge of it. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a fun challenge. I'll give that a shot. Like, yeah. And so when I saw that, I was like, I think I can do that. And I actually have 2 other ones because originally I wanted a trio of triolets because I thought that would be fun. But I ran out of time to finish the other 2. So I got to finish those at some point. So that's how I got to it. That's how, and it is obscure. It's actually, there are very few remaining examples of that form of poetry like in existence, which I thought was really fascinating and interesting. I was like, well, I'll give that a shot. Like, sure.
Well, I'm glad you did. It's really beautiful. Do you have it up so that, let's see what time? I don't want to run out of time. We have
Okay, we have time. So
Okay.
you have the words. There it is. Could you read it to us so that we have the right
Sure.
rhythm?
Yeah. So I called it The Sword and the Stone, and because it's about that episode, basically.
Okay.
And then it turns the idea on its head. So, in doing deed, one for his nourished brother. How then was this sword raised out of stone? Too ignoble, it must be for another. In doing deed, one for his nourished brother. Christmas morning, blade set to discover, who called a father sir, who was not his own. In doing deed, one for his nourished brother. How then was this sword raised out of stone? So you can change you have to repeat lines, but of course we're changing the meaning. So the idea of a nourished brother gets flipped on its head in Arthur because Arthur is the nourished brother. Kay originally, he pulls the sword, Kay takes the sword, right, and claims that he did it, but then we figure out it's not. But Arthur is actually the savior of the thing because he turns out to be the king. Well, and Christ, the same in that sense, has an earthly father who is not his own, right? Who is like his adopted dad. I mean, Joseph took care of him, but that's not his dad. So, in that sense, so then also was Christ raised out of stone, and it's interesting because that the whole blade announcement situation, Sword in the Stone, happens Christmas morning in Mallory's account. So it's a really interesting, like I used Christmas morning as the turn, like almost like a volta, to put you in the mind of Christ, and then flip the punctuation so that you are realizing like, oh, we're talking about an ultimate king.
Mm-hmm.
At the end.
Excellent. That's why it's so important. It's so much fun to study poetry.
Oh, yeah.
Just flat out read it on the page. It sounds lovely. It's lyrical. It's pretty. But then when you find out the meaning behind it all and why it's written the way it is and why it has to end a certain way and why you repeated those lines, worlds open up.
Yeah, it's like I always think poetry is like a TARDIS or a Narnian wardrobe. You open the door and there's this whole other world inside of that little poem. You know, it's like the best thing ever. And I always tell my students that you're looking at a small amount of words on a page and short lines, and inside all of that is this whole other world. And we're going to open up all the doors to it and see what's like hiding out in there. And it's going to blow your mind.
Oh, that's excellent. That's exhilarating and so inspirational. And to be able to share that with kids, they can find that out so early in their lives. It makes such a difference for the things that they read from that point on.
And I feel like art works like that too. Like Virginia's drawing, you could look at that drawing for hours and find all these different things in it. And I mean, you know that, Annie, from art and art history, that the great paintings, you could look at a great painting on the surface and say, oh, that's beautiful, it's amazing, it's a cool scene. But you know, to look and to understand the purpose, like if Virginia unpacks why things are the way they are, we're going to be like, oh, whoa, you know.
Which is what I'm going to ask her to do, Virginia.
So that was a great segue.
That was a perfect segue because I wanted Virginia to step in and be the curator here and explain the little magical, amazing details in this piece. So go ahead, Virginia.
Oh, it's just that I love medieval manuscripts because there's so much beauty, and I think that one of the best things to do to fight evil in this world is with beauty, goodness, and truth. And I really think that beauty is one of the most important ones. And I think the medieval manuscripts are an amazing thing to do, and amazing work of art to look at, and I can never get tired of looking at them, and I just learn all the time. The hardest part was to choose what Arthurian element to choose from, because I was at first thinking, oh, should I go with Excalibur? Should I go with the Holy Grail? Should I go? Actually, I drew a Holy Grail, but it got voted down, so it didn't work. And then I really thought, okay, but horses, and there's the thing about honor, and I just was thinking about how to make it appealing and beautiful, and also just to draw you in all these, because it was all about legends and poems and scholarship, which was an MO, and it had to be beautiful cover for all of your work, because I think your work is amazing. And so I really like the horses though. But then the sword was the last thing that I chose. I was between, should I do the Lady of the Lake? Should I do, Merlin? Should I do? I really didn't know what to choose from. So then I thought, no, the quest for the Holy Grail was later. It's not exactly Arthurian, but later. Should I go? So I just thought I would just choose the thing that started all. And then there were wars, and there were. So I thought, the two horses, two opposite teams. And I know everyone can take what they want from it, because I think it just it was first like it was taken from one of the manuscripts actually. Some people thought it was jousting, but if you look at one of the manuscripts, the horses, there were some horses that they were jousting, and other like horses dressed just like that, they were in a battle. And you have all those little things that I find absolutely delightful in medieval manuscript, like cutting heads off and smiling while they cut it, and blood running out, but which I cannot of course draw at this culture, but it was. So yeah, I looked at a lot of, and actually there are some French manuscripts with illuminated drawings about Arthur, and I did a lot of research just to think how was the, like the flavor to give to the cover.
Right.
So
I love it.
I think illuminated manuscripts, those are my favorite things. I'm just going to hold up another book, because we keep holding up books, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
The Illuminations of Heaven and Earth, the glories of Très Riche du Doc de Berry.
Oh yeah. Oh, these are beautiful.
Yes, the whole thing. So it's an illuminated manuscript of Book of Hours.
Yes. Oh,
and really, you can lose yourself in every page for hours. Oh, yes, Tom, exactly. Behind every mountain is another mountain.
Yes. That's my dad.
I love on the cover how it looks specifically like you have illuminated a manuscript page. And with the colors, the bright colors, but it's in the form that it's in. That's what it would look like. And go ahead.
No, yes, because I have a lot of books in my bookshelf about illuminated manuscripts as well. I'm a total geek for them, and I just keep looking at them, and I go back to them, and I see all these little things like rabbits running, like human snails walking, and it's all sorts of things. But yes, it had to be medieval, and I think that is a really underappreciated form of art today, because I think we don't make things beautiful. They made all their stories beautiful because they were beautiful, and they had to show it in another way. And I think it's a lost art that we have been losing, and yeah,
it really is. And when you go back even more deeply thinking about it, those artists, those monks that used to do the manuscripts, the people, the craftsmen that made those illuminated manuscripts, they had to make their own paint.
Oh,
yes. They had to make the substance that would carry the pigment to paint on the paper, which was not paper, it was vellum. So it took days to do that. And if they made one mistake, they would have to scrape it off the vellum, scrape, and start all over again. And what you've done by showing us what an illuminated manuscript would look like, I hope that people are lured in to go in and really research the illuminated manuscript, especially the Book of Hours. And they were always something that was commissioned by some wealthy patron to have their own illuminated manuscript. Oh, look at Denise. Yes. Denise lives in Germany right now.
Wow. Okay.
So when they would illuminate these beautiful manuscripts, it's almost overwhelming to see the detail. And what you've done is the balance of the colors and the design, everything was very, very overall symmetrical. There were little vines and little animals and those funny snails that were going through, and the mythical animals and the beasts, and you captured all of that in that cover and in the other cover that you did for us as well. So I'm so glad this was your favorite thing. I was thinking, does Virginia have time to design a medieval King Arthur cover? I think she likes this.
I really like it. I really do like it. It's one of my favorite things to draw besides bunnies and dogs and animals and squirrels and, like funny stuff. I really like medieval things. And I think everyone has access to them, because if you go to any library, like the British Library, the French Library, you can look at those manuscripts online. And they're available. I have spent weeks and weeks and weeks looking at them and studying them. So they're beautiful. And Chesterton used to do that the same with funny things. And I think we can bring it back to do it in our daily life. When I teach a medical school, so I do that with my bacteria sometimes. And they're like doing stuff and fighting antibiotics and antibiotics fighting bacteria. And it's all within an illuminated border, which I think is I really love it, because I love teaching about it. I just love bringing beauty to our lives, and I think that's what those monks did. And I'm so happy you like, because honestly I struggle with color, so some covers are going to be pretty, some covers are not so much. I really like this one, and I like the medieval one, and also the joy one. The joy cover was also one that I like. Yeah, those are kind of like my 3 favorites. But
this one, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Every time it pops up, everyone's like, oh, it's so beautiful. I love it. I love it. It's perfect. Like, yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Zane says, my dream is finding an illuminated manuscript in an old dusty.
Well,
yes.
Especially if they didn't know how much it was worth, and I could just walk into the bookshop and buy it and waltz my way home. I think that would be kind of delightful.
Yes, absolutely.
If you ever have a chance, anybody out there, any of our listeners or anybody else, if you have a chance to get to the Bible Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., they have one room dedicated to Bibles and a separate room dedicated to illuminated manuscripts and Book of Hours. And really, they have to pull me out of there, because I would stand there and stare all day long. That they paint these dots with a 3-hair brush with the hair from a squirrel tail, or I don't know.
Wow.
To go back to that era and appreciate what was done. Makoto Fujimura, in his paintings, he goes back to the medieval era of Japan, and his paintings take weeks, months to do, because everything, it's medieval. He grinds the pigments, he puts them suspended in whatever oil or whatever it is, makes a layer, lets that dry, adds another layer. And that's what medieval manuscripts are like as well. You have to put down the drop of glue, take the gold sheet, gold leaf, rub it over that, trim it around so that there's one tiny gold dot on that page. That was the era of craftsmanship in time. Of course, they didn't have to answer emails, right?
I mean, I think that's why it's so important to have chances to participate in those kind of activities, because when you try to do that, you realize how difficult it is. You know, you think, oh, there's a sonnet, and then you try to write a sonnet, and you're like, oh, to do this well is a lot of work. And you see a beautiful illustrated manuscript, and you're like, oh, to do that well is a lot of work. Wow. Ted Wright says, oh, great connection, Annie.
I love Mako. Yes.
We have our third graders are making different things. Oh, one thing we made was a little mosaic, small little ichthus mosaic, like talking about the Christians in the catacombs. Then later we're looking at Pompeii at these giant mosaic floors. And I say to them, just how long did it take you to make that little mosaic? And how long would it take all of our mosaics put together to make this big floor, in this house or in wherever it was? And they're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And that would take forever. And I said, that's one of the reasons when you find something like this, it's so astonishing. Because look how beautiful it is and how long somebody spent on it and how well done it is. And I think that's why you call people to participate in that And then even more staggering as we look at creation and how amazing, and fabulous God is. We're getting to participate, but it's just like at a baby level.
Yeah.
He's phenomenal creator.
We were created to create.
Yeah.
So Virginia, I'm curious how the process of what's the process of creating this cover that you did? Is it on a computer? Do you sketch it out by hand and then transfer it to a computer, or what do you do?
It depends. I start by sketching on paper just several ideas, and then researching in illuminated manuscripts to see what style I want to go with and what colors I would like to choose for that, and elements. And I start choosing elements. What I want, because I was thinking maybe the Lady of the Lake with a hand, but then I show it to people, and I ask them, what do you think? And they say, I don't get what this means. So take it up, and I'm like, okay, because it has to reach everyone. So I would ask my family, I would ask Seamus, I would ask everyone, like, what do you think? And they say like, I don't get it. No, I think there should be like a balance. So I need feedback in order to just do it. And so I started choosing elements, and then I started arranging it. And I also have fear of making mistakes, but the medieval people I really love their mistakes, because then they go with the flow. They make a little line, and then they continue it and make a tail of a mouse, and I just love it. But since now I work digitally, so I can choose how I have more control in that way. And that's one of the things. And then I just finish on the iPad. Usually that's what I finish all the things. And I choose a color palette. I really struggle with colors. So I've been learning lately how to do it, but I still have a lot to learn. I don't use those like bright colors as I used to do at the first covers of these journals, but yeah, I struggle with color a bit. That's the thing that is harder to me. But and then I finish it, and then I send it to you and for feedback, like definitely. But that's what I do. But on the other hand, today I think it's a call for everyone, because we have the elements to bring all that beauty back to us, because we have iPads, we have printers, so we could have all that beauty within our daily things if we wanted to. So I don't know. I think that, as Chesterton says, if we would love things, we would make them beautiful. And I think it's lack of love for the daily things that we live with, because we don't make them as beautiful as the medieval did. Maybe it's not that we don't love it. Maybe the medieval people love their things more than we do. I don't know. But anyway,
they had an eye for beauty, and I think they were more in touch with we're made in the image of God, so we are created to also be creators, and that was their way of glorifying God, is to make beauty reflected from what He put into all of us as makers, whether it's painting, writing poetry, cooking, architecture, whatever it is that you make.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
The Gothic architecture, don't make me start. I just love it.
Yes. And so we can reflect back what is beautiful, and we can recognize what is beautiful. We can look at an ugly building that looks like a concrete block.
Oh, yeah, there's so many of those now.
Yeah, there is, because we just
many.
Don't take the time. Or we look at some of the beautiful museums downtown DC that are done in that classical Greek architectural style. But yes, we can take inspiring things like Clarice's poetry, Virginia, your beautiful drawings, and say, yes, I'm going to find where you have a strength or where you feel like you have a call, and pursue that. And you're not going to be great right out of the gate.
No.
But it's going to be a pursuit of beauty and a place to go out of chaos out there, a place of beauty and rest and repose to experience. And I think beautiful art, beautiful writing is such a good thing to go back to, and we should take our time to do it. So
absolutely.
I'm talking too much.
No, you're not.
No, you're not. I know. It's so fun.
I went a minute over. I'm so sorry, but you guys, this was awesome, Virginia.
I
Thank
know.
you.
No, it's great to
Maurice,
be
thank
here.
you. It
It's
was
good
so
to
much
see
fun
you.
too.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, and I wanted to talk about your beautiful covers. So what do you have coming up, Virginia? Anything?
Oh, I have to send a drawing for the Gilbert magazine, Chesterton for Dale, but I have not even started yet, but I will somehow. I don't know. I'm always, they have been very patient with me for everyone who's listening because I'm always late with my covers. I'm always just barely on time and they bear with me. But yeah, I'm a little bit late with the live quiz drawing as well. So.
Well, Carice, we're always on time, aren't we?
Oh, always. Whenever we get there, Annie is on time. That's the time.
Oh, okay. Because I see this is my due date, and I start.
This is my time.
You're fine.
I keep asking everyone, when is my due date? And then just 2 days before I start,
right?
I need due dates, and then just please lie to me and tell me 2 days ahead.
That's right. There you go. Yeah.
Yes. It's okay. We do get it done. We pull it together.
Yeah. But at the last minute. I'm a whirlwind of ideas and work.
Yeah, it's just pinning it all down. I know how whirlwinds go. Whirlwinds whirl. I understand that. And
I work that way. I work with due dates. I need due dates. If not, I will never have anything.
Ted posted a book about
about Umberto Eco.
Yeah.
I can't remember the title of it, but he said it's a great book on this topic.
There it is. Art and Beauty in the Middle Ages.
Art and Beauty in the Middle Ages. Yeah, Umberto Eco.
And I would recommend Stratford Caldecott's Beauty.
Beauty.
For Truth's Sake.
For Truth's Sake. Yeah, I was going to say for goodness sake, but I knew that was wrong.
That's so good.
Beauty for Truth's Sake is an excellent read as well. And Ted, you made a really good point about we need to be taught how to see. And I had my high schoolers read that book, the Stratford Caldecott book. And
so good.
Once they read that, they couldn't see art in the same way. They said
really?
They said everybody should read this book in high school because it taught them how to see the geometry, the planning, the beauty, the symbolism, that art is not just slapped on a page. There's so much more to it, but you can see that and it gives you an appreciation of that. And so that's another book that I would recommend.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is.
I'm going to write it down because I love Stratford Caldecott. I love his thinking. I just love it. I have not read that book.
Yes, Beauty for Truth's Sake. It is highly recommended.
Carla just said if we wrap this up, we can talk in the wrap up.
Sorry. I was giving that out as a benefit to our watchers and our listeners. And
I thought that was great. I was all for it.
Yes, there we go. All right. So we do have to wrap it up. So sorry. Yes, we have 10 minutes before we shut things down. So
we have another giveaway too.
Oh, thank you.
Good to see you all.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, we're on mute. Oh, there we are. We're all three here still together again. We have to do a wrap up. How do we wrap up?
And don't forget to hashtag Camelot, right?
Hashtag Camelot.
You can win a whole year of an unexpected journal. So
yeah,
you don't want to miss that.
Don't miss that. Hashtag Camelot. So wrapping all this up, Carice, what would you say?
Oh, goodness. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's been such an amazing day talking to all these different authors, different genres, artists, poets. Almost feels like we went to this like King Arthur fair, right? And had this amazing feast of poetry and literature and conversation. And I just only wish like we had an actual, like all of us actually together in an actual feast. That'd be like so fun. So maybe we need to plan one of those. But yeah, this has been fantastic. Such a great day. And I hope if people miss any of the segments, they can go back and watch any of them. And then you can pick up a copy of this, a hard copy, or you can read online. It's available online for free to go back and read the articles that maybe you heard about and you haven't read yet, or to re-examine some. As you were talking to people, Annie, I was like, I'm going to go back and read that again. Like that is so interesting. Like thought about that concept. I was like, oh, I got to go back again. So yeah. And
But
I
if
just
you-
want to
if
sit,
you-
like, look at the cover because it's so beautiful.
Yes. Wish I had one in front of me.
I
If you
know.
subscribe, a year's subscription will give you a discounted price.
Yes.
But what I like, I am a paper person. I can read it online and it's great, but I'm a paper person because I write in all of my
I write
margins.
all that. Yeah.
Circle, write, margins, and that way you can really actually see Virginia's beautiful work up close. And I ask that look into getting a subscription. If you go to our website, An Unexpected Journal, there is a subscription site. You can buy one copy off of Amazon, or you can subscribe to us, and you won't miss each of the journals as they come out. There's been 2 released this year. One more is coming up this fall. That's the Leisure and Play, and then the last one is Dostoevsky.
Yes, it's gonna be so good. Yes, you need some Russians in your winter. So get a pot of tea, and the snow is outside, and you can just get hunkered down in there with the Russians. It'd be great.
Yes, precisely why we stuck him as the Advent issue is because what's better than a Russian in wintertime?
You have to be reading it in the winter. I cannot try to read it in the summer, and I'm too yay.
Yes, you need something deep and heady and
yeah, because you can get in your chair with your cat, and teapot, your blanket, crack on the fire, good to go.
Nice bowl of borscht and boiled potato perhaps, and sit and enjoy. So that one I'm really excited about because I think just like the Fairy Queen that we all want to read, we all say I can't wait to read it, and we don't. The Russian authors are in that category of I would love to say that I read Dostoevsky, and well, now's your opportunity. If you have read him, great. If you are so inclined, send us a paper that you have composed.
Absolutely.
If not, if you get the year's subscription, that copy of Dostoevsky will show up in your mailbox, and you can get like a primer on the Russians and then read the academic work that goes into research and study of why they do what they do. So,
and if those are books that you love, you already kind of have like a relationship with those books, and they're awesome and they're favorites, then this is definitely the issue for you. Or if you know somebody who loves them, that would be a great. You won again?
No, spin it, Carla.
Sorry, babe, you already won. You can't win again. Oh, we're spinning. Ooh, from Sydney, Australia. Did you see that?
My goodness.
International spinners. Yes. It's
That's
amazing.
exciting.
I love it.
All right. Did she spin? Oh, there we go. Whoa. Look at all those names.
Oh, that's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
Everybody. Denise!
Yay! And an international winner because she lives in Germany. Yay, Denise.
International. I love it. Way to go, Denise. That's
Excellent.
awesome.
Excellent. All right. Well, I can't wait till she finds out that she won the annual subscription. That's excellent.
She's going to be so excited. I wonder if she said she was turning into a pumpkin. So hopefully she is not quite a pumpkin yet, and she can find out she won.
If she pumpkinized, then she will find out.
Just think how happy she's going to be when she wakes up. She's going to be so happy.
Oh, happiness. All right, we got a few minutes left.
Oh, can we pop up the website maybe, Carl? I cannot point on this. Pop up the website so people can see like where to go. One of those places.
One of those
Um,
places.
yeah, if they
Here we
want
go.
to look online or if they want to subscribe, yes, there you go. It's super simple, and unexpectedjournal.com. We're also
Yep.
on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, so you can find us in all those places. If you would love to donate, we would love to help to use that to facilitate this ministry that none of us get paid for. So that would be awesome and amazing to keep it going because we love it. We love it. It's a labor of love.
It is, and it is a ministry. We work with a lot of schools and churches and small groups, reading groups. These are the journal is a great add-on to a reading group book club.
Absolutely.
Because the cool thing about the journal, it's loaded with footnotes and citations that can send you on rabbit trails to fill up your bookshelves.
And the various authors, you go down and read the bios about the authors, and I think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna look that person up and see what else they wrote, and then I'm off in a whole nother book buying binge. More books.
It's okay. It's
That's
okay.
all right. That's what the world needs.
It's what we should do. Read more books. So yes. So thank you ahead of time for anybody who chooses to subscribe to an Unexpected Journal for the year. Your membership will save you some money. I believe, doesn't the year membership also give you a Kindle?
I feel like you get something with it. Something else.
Actual footnotes, which we are all fans of.
Actual footnotes. Yes.
Yep. And I think you get an electronic copy of it as well with a year membership. So you can also have it on your Kindle if you are so inclined. So, so upcoming issues, we're already going to be releasing our ideas for 2024. I think we are pretty much settled on that. Also, if you do want to submit some work that you have done, on the website, go to find the drop-down tab, and it will say on Unexpected Journal, submissions. Yes. And there is a rubric on what we want followed as far as how to do citations. Very helpful rubric. So when you write it up, you can do the citations correctly. You will know whether we want 1 or 2 spaces between CS and Lewis, or between C period. S period.
That was like an ongoing hot ticket debate.
A hot debate. Very hot debate. Oxford, comma.
Yes, please.
Yes.
We're firm supporters of the Oxford comma. Absolutely.
Yes. So you will find that out as well. But yes, so just if you want to submit, it's very straightforward, and look at the rubric that we have posted on submission guidelines and the technical aspects of what you would want to submit. And that would be very helpful.
And it'll tell you the upcoming issues and like themes kind of within them. And you can also read that. If you're wanting to submit, I would read some things from the back issues to get kind of the jam of the whole situation, kind of like what's the flavor. But yeah, go for it. Let's go. We love our authors at An Unexpected Journal, and we're super excited to see you in the submissions. So
yes, especially if you have done graduate work or if you've done dissertation work, we are an option for you. If you've done something like Josh and Camilo wrote these things for their PhD level studies, and you have it on your computer, if something matches up with one of our themes, please send it along, because we would love to share your good work and good academic work. So yes. Well, I guess that's about it. I think it's wrap up time. It is top of the hour.
All right.
Get our name giveaway.
Right.
Virginia, thank you for hanging out.
Thank you for having me.
So awesome.
Thank you.
Yes. So we will see y'all again in another quarter when we talk about leisure.
Yes.
And it's going to be a lot of fun.
So much fun.
Oh.
Yes. So thanks everybody for joining us today. It's been amazing and wonderful. Thank you to all the authors. Thank you to all the guest panels, and thank you to all of our listeners and watchers. And
Yes.
congrats to all the winners. So
Yes.
thanks everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.